Chapter 654. After several days of preparation, Yi Guqin and the others prepared to head to the imperial capital. Su Jianshi and Shui also wanted to follow. Yi Guqin didn't stop them. After all, Su Jianshi had been under too much pressure recently. It was good for her to relax in the imperial capital. In addition, Yan Wushuang, Ji Ling, Chu Qingqi, Yi Xia, and the others also followed. However, before Yi Guqin and the others could reach the entrance of the Sword Sex Pagoda forest, two figures appeared. Then, he saw two figures walking towards him. Yan Wushuang's eyes flashed with a trace of annoyance. It was Yan Xiaotang and Yan Feiling. "Cousin, where are you going?" Yan Xiaotang was dressed in luxurious clothes and looked extraordinarily handsome. After these days of recuperation, his injuries had more or less recovered. Although he had lost a lot of face, Yan Xiaotang didn't want to give up just like that. His skin was extraordinarily thick. At this moment, he had a faint smile on his face as if he had forgotten how embarrassed he had been. Yan Feiling, on the other hand, was much more well-behaved. She didn't dare to be arrogant in the Sword Sex Pagoda forest anymore. Although she still faintly felt some hostility towards Yi Guqin, she didn't dare to throw her princess tantrum anymore. "It's nothing. We're just going out for a stroll." Yan Wushuang didn't want to say too much. Yan Xiaotang's smile stiffened. He then continued, "Let me guess. Could it be that you're going to the imperial capital? I heard that the dynasty auction is about to be held and all the prodigies from the various dynasties will gather." Yan Wushuang didn't say anything after being exposed by Yan Xiaotang. "Since that's the case, let me go with you. If anything happens, we can take care of each other. After all, some prodigies from high-tier dynasties aren't to be trifled with," said Yan Xiaotang with a faint smile. In other words, if Yi Guqin and the others offended a prodigy from a high-tier dynasty, it would be difficult for them to be on good terms. However, as the crown prince of the Swallow Cloud dynasty, the other high-tier dynasties would also give him face. Yan Wushuang didn't comment on that. It seemed that the battle with Yi Guqin hadn't made him see reality. They still had the pride of being a high-tier empire in their bones. Yan Xiaotang's eyes revealed a wisp of delight when he saw Yan Wushuang didn't directly refuse, and he said once more, "Not to mention, if cousin sister takes a fancy to anything in the dynasty's auction, then cousin brother can help you bid for it. After all, that auction doesn't use crystal jades, but heavenly crystals." Yan Wushuang's expression froze slightly as she was slightly tempted. Some low-level dynasties used crystal jades as their currency. However, the mid- and high-grade dynasties all used heaven crystals as their currency. One heaven crystal could be exchanged for 100 crystal jades. The reason why Yan Wushuang was moved was not because she wanted to obtain something from Yan Xiaotang. Instead, Yi Guqin said that he wanted to search for ores, crystals, and the 5 elements sword array. In Yan Wushuang's eyes, Yi Guqin didn't seem to have the habit of amassing wealth. Not to mention heaven crystals, he probably didn't even have many crystal jades. It was precisely because of this that Yan Wushuang wanted to borrow Yan Xiaotang's wealth to help Yi Guqin obtain what he wanted. Yi Guqin naturally did not know what Yan Wushuang was thinking. He wasn't foolish enough to announce his gains from the Venerable One's cave. Seeing that Yan Wushuang seemed to be interested, Yan Xiaotang was even more delighted. He secretly glanced at Yi Guqin. This was what it meant by "money makes the world go round." No matter how prideful and noble a lady was, it would be hard for her to resist the temptation of money. "Ha, cousin, don't worry. If you have something that you like, I'll naturally help you get it. Let's not talk about anything else. I still have 100,000 heaven crystals," Yan Xiaotang said with a smile. As the crown prince of a high-level dynasty, 100,000 heaven crystals was indeed not a small amount. It was equivalent to 10 million crystal jades. In your low-level dynasty, I reckon that you haven't even seen many heaven crystals," Yan Feiling mumbled softly. Yan Xiaotang smiled and even glanced at Yi Guqin intentionally. He smiled and said, "Of course, if Brother Yi has something that you want, you can tell me directly. I won't be stingy either." There's no need to trouble you. Yi Guchen's expression was calm. He had 1,000,000 heaven crystals in his origin ring. Yan Xiaotang only had 100,000 heaven crystals. How could he be shameless enough to open his mouth and help him? Of course, Yi Guchen was too lazy to expose him. He was not so bored as to compete with him in terms of wealth. Ha, brother Yi, there's no need to pretend to be reserved. In a low-level dynasty, it's normal to not have heaven crystals. Yan Xiaotang misunderstood Yi Guchen and thought that he was trying to be brave. Who knew that Yi Guchen really did not care? Let's go, Yi Guchen said calmly. As Yan Xiaotang and Yan Feiling joined in, the atmosphere became a little awkward. On the other hand, Yan Xiaotang patiently chatted with Yan Wushuang, which made Yan Feiling feel a little jealous. Although Yan Xiaotang lost to Yi Guchen and his position in Yan Feiling's heart dropped a little, he was still very outstanding no matter what. After a few days, Yi Guchen and the others rode on flying beasts and finally arrived at Xing Yuan Mansion's imperial city. Looking from afar, the imperial city was incomparably vast, surpassing any city that Yi Guchen had seen before. This is the imperial city. Yi Guchen was also slightly surprised. The city stood tall and majestic, and it was worthy of the name of the imperial city. Yan Xiaotang's eyes revealed faint disdain as he said, "It looks a little like it." The imperial city of a low-level dynasty was not worth mentioning in his eyes. The Swallow Cloud dynasty's capital was much larger than the imperial city, and its scale could not be compared. Yi Guchen and the other inner court disciples ignored Yan Xiaotang and directly rode on flying beasts to land and enter the imperial city. In the imperial city, there was a dense stream of people. Although it was usually crowded with people, there had been even more people entering the imperial city recently. Many of them were people from other dynasties. After all, the qualifiers were about to begin, and various geniuses would gather in advance. Cousin, now that you're in the imperial city, you have to be careful with your words and actions. If you're not careful, you might offend people from other dynasties. Of course, with me here, ordinary dynasties won't dare to do anything to you, Yan Xiaotang said. Yan Wushuang ignored him and asked Yi Guchen, "What do we do next?" "Let's find a place to stay first," Yi Guchen said. Yan Xiaotang saw this scene and secretly frowned. However, he instantly regained his composure. This was because Yan Wushuang still needed to rely on him to bid for treasures in the dynasty's auction. Subsequently, Yi Guchen and the others found an inn. Yan Xiaotang took the initiative to pay the bill. Yi Guchen did not mind. "Cousin, I'll take you out for a walk," Yan Xiaotang invited Yan Wushuang. "I want to go too." Yan Feiling followed closely behind. Yan Wushuang's expression changed, but when she thought of helping Yi Guchen to bid for treasures, she gritted her teeth and acquiesced. Of course, Ji Ling, Chu Qingqi, and the others also followed. After the group left, Yi Guchen relaxed. He wanted to search for chaos origin crystals and other items, so he did not want to be followed by a group of people. "Let's go." Yi Guchen led Su Jianshi and Shui in another direction. The place he wanted to go was the imperial city's market. Chapter 655. As the largest city in the Saint Origin dynasty, there were countless items that could be traded in the marketplace. Yi Guchen wanted to try his luck. Although it might not be easy to find it. On the streets of the market, many passers-by looked at Yi Guchen's group. Of course, they were mainly focused on Su Jianshi and Shui. One big and one small, they were both beauties. Some passers-by even whispered with envy, "I really envy that young master. Not only does he have such a beautiful wife, but he also has such a cute daughter." Su Jianshi's face heated up when she heard the passers-by's words. She glanced at Yi Guchen from the corner of her eyes. She noticed that Yi Guchen was expressionless. "Humph. Silly boy, you're a blockhead." Su Jianshi pouted and wrinkled her nose. After coming to the imperial city to relax, her mood had also relaxed slightly, and she was no longer as gloomy as before. Tanghulu. Shui saw someone selling tanghulu, and she blinked her big eyes, saliva dripping from the corner of her mouth. Yi Guqin couldn't help but laugh. He bought 2 Tanghulu sticks and gave one to Shui, and Su Jianshi. I have one too. Su Jianshi blinked. Of course. Yi Guqin smiled faintly. To be honest, this feeling of warmth wasn't bad. However, Yi Guqin didn't forget his goal, which was to search for the Chaos Origin Crystal and the 5 Elemental Sword Array. However, after searching for half a day, Yi Guqin still couldn't find the 2 items in the market. It looks like I'll have to look for them at the auction. Yi Guqin sighed inwardly. At this moment, he suddenly saw a huge hall on the side of the road. The Sword Battle Hall. Yi Guqin was interested and led Su Jianshi and Shui in. A maid came forward and explained to Yi Guqin. The Sword Battle Hall was a place for sword cultivators to cultivate. There was a special array that could suppress one's true qi. Anyone who entered the hall could only rely on their sword techniques to defeat their opponents. Every victory would earn 10,000 crystal jades. Of course, if he lost a match, he would have to pay 10,000 crystal jades. As if she was afraid that Yi Guqin wouldn't take the bait, the maid smiled sweetly and said, "Of course, if young master is willing to participate, the benefits won't be limited to this. If you win 10 consecutive victories, you will receive an additional 100,000 crystal jades. And if you're able to break the record, you'll be able to obtain a reward of 5 million crystal jades." The maid smiled sweetly and bewitchingly. Although she had heard of Yi Guqin's name, she did not recognize him. Seeing that Yi Guqin was young, he guessed that he was a hot-blooded youth. This kind of person was the easiest to swindle. And every time Yi Guqin lost a match, the maid would be able to draw 1,000 crystal jades as a reward. "Oh, what's the record here?" Yi Guqin asked curiously. 72 consecutive victories. The maid said. Then, as if she was afraid that Yi Guqin would back down, she said, "Of course, with young master's outstanding sword techniques, a mere 72 consecutive victories is nothing. Even 100 consecutive victories is nothing." "Is that so?" Yi Guqin revealed a playful look. "Of course." The maid smiled and flattered him, but she was secretly laughing in her heart. As if. Not to mention 72 consecutive victories, even in the sword battle dojo, it was rare to see someone with 10 consecutive victories. In addition, it was the eve of the Prodigy Battlefield qualifiers. These days, many prodigies from other dynasties had come. All of them were extraordinary, and there was no lack of extremely talented sword cultivators. In such a special period, it was already very difficult to obtain 10 consecutive victories, let alone break the record. Therefore, during this period, most of the sword cultivators who entered the sword battle dojo lost more than they won. Interesting. Bring me in. Yi Guqin smiled faintly. If he had not plundered the Venerable One's cave abode, then he would really be tempted by the reward of 5 million crystal jades. But now, Yi Guqin just wanted to hone his sword Dao. He also wanted to see which prodigies from the other dynasties were. Hearing this, the maid's eyes lit up and she smiled. She thought that another fat fish had taken the bait. Then, the maid brought Yi Guqin, Su Jianshi, and Shui into the sword battle dojo. Looking around, the area was very large. The ground was engraved with special runes that could suppress true qi. This allowed the sword cultivators to compete purely with their sword techniques. The field was divided into dozens of arenas, and they were all packed with people. There were also many spectators in the surroundings. Yi Guqin casually looked around and found that most of the sword cultivators in the arenas were beaten down after 1 or 2 rounds. There were only a few arenas that were firmly guarded. On one of the arenas stood a woman in a fiery red dress. She was as bright as flames and her face was extremely beautiful. The thin sword in her hand seemed to have flames flowing around it. This Vermilion Bird Dynasty's Kei Ling is really powerful. She has already won 11 consecutive battles. Of course, Kei Ling is the most famous female sword cultivator in the Vermilion Bird Dynasty. Her Vermilion Bird sword is very powerful. Many spectators below the arena clicked their tongues in discussion. Kei Ling stood on the arena like a fiery lotus. Her beautiful eyes were calm. Although she didn't say anything, there was a faint proud smile on her face. She enjoyed everyone's admiration. Vermilion Bird Dynasty? Yi Guqin was confused. He didn't know much about these dynasties. His gaze moved towards the other side. A black-clothed man stood on the arena. His entire body emitted a ghastly aura, and his sword moves were vicious and tricky. It was a strange path. Black Death's sword Ku Mo of the Xianming dynasty isn't bad either. He has also won 10 consecutive battles, someone exclaimed. Just as Yi Guqin was sizing up the sword cultivators, a voice sounded. A discordant voice rang out, "Miss, could it be that you wish to participate in the sword battle? If you lose, it's fine. I can help you pay for everything." Yi Guqin frowned and turned to look. He saw a youth in a brocade robe walking over with his hands behind his back. He was handsome and had a faint smile on his face. Behind him was an old man with unfathomable strength. The youth in brocade robe sized up Su Jianshi. His eyes were filled with surprise. He had seen many beautiful women, but it was his first time seeing someone as pure and beautiful as Su Jianshi. That pure temperament made him feel as if he was attracted to it. When the maid who received Yi Guqin saw who it was, her expression changed. She hurried forward and said with respect, "So it's Marquis Yu Wenji of the Great Yu Dynasty. Are you also here to participate in the sword battle?" "What? It's the young Marquis of the Great Yu Dynasty. The Great Yu Dynasty is a high-tier dynasty. I've heard that Yu Wenji is also a sky pride with extraordinary aptitude." Upon hearing this, a surprised expression appeared on the faces of the surrounding people. The Great Yu Dynasty was also a high-ranked dynasty like the Swallow Cloud Dynasty. In a place like the Saint Origin Dynasty, it was an existence that everyone looked up to. "Who are you? I don't know you." Su Jianshi moved closer to Yi Guqin. "May I know which dynasty you're from?" Yu Wenji's eyes turned cold as he looked at Yi Guqin. "Saint Origin Dynasty," Yi Guqin said calmly. "Oh, so you're a native of the Saint Origin Dynasty," Yu Wenji said indifferently. He didn't ridicule Su Jianshi. Just the word, native, was enough to express his attitude. Most of the spectators were natives of the Saint Origin Dynasty. They naturally felt uncomfortable when they heard that. However, they didn't dare to say anything. After all, Yu Wenji was the young marquis. "Are all people from high-ranked dynasties like you? Do you only know how to talk?" Yi Guqin said coldly. When people from high-ranked dynasties came to low-ranked dynasties, they were like emperors on a tour. They were all arrogant. Yan Xiaotang was a clear example. However, Yi Guqin was a little annoyed when there were too many people like that. However, when he said this, the surroundings fell silent. The maid's eyes widened. There was actually someone who dared to talk back to a prodigy from a high-ranked dynasty. Chapter 656. Oh, interesting, Yu Wenji wasn't angry when he heard Yi Guqin's words. Instead, he had a playful smile on his face as he spoke again. "You don't know who I am? Who are you?" Yi Guqin raised his brows. "The young prince of the Great Yu Dynasty's Prince Yu Mansion," Yu Wenji said proudly. The Great Yu Dynasty was a high-ranked dynasty and had a decent reputation in the entire Nantian region. Even if it wasn't comparable to the top dynasties with false sacred experts, it wasn't something a remote dynasty like the Saint Origin Dynasty could compare to. The Prince Yu Mansion was one of the strongest forces in the Great Yu Dynasty. He was the most dazzling genius of the Prince Yu Mansion, an expert of the great profound martial realm. "Sorry, I've never heard of you." Yi Guqin shook his head and led Su Jianshi and Shui to the sword duel arena. I think you don't have the money to participate in the sword duel." Yu Wenji's eyes flashed coldly when he saw Su Jianshi following Yi Guqin obediently. He had already revealed his identity, but neither Yi Guqin nor Su Jianshi took him seriously. "Bring me to the sword duel arena," Yu Wenji said coldly. "Yes." The maid that received Yi Guqin led Yu Wenji to the sword duel arena. In her opinion, Yu Wenji's identity was clearly higher than Yi Guqin's. Someone from the Great Yu dynasty. As Yu Wenji began the sword duel, Kai Ling, of the Vermilion Bird dynasty and Ku Mo of the Xianming dynasty turned their gazes to Yu Wenji. They were both middle-ranked dynasties that were stronger than the Saint Origin dynasty, but not as strong as the Great Yu dynasty. I'll let you see just how big of a gap there is between the sword skills of a high-tier empire and a low-tier empire like yours. Yu Wenji flipped his wrist and an extremely beautiful longsword landed in his hand. As he spoke, he glanced at Yi Guqin and Su Jianxue with disdain. Soon, someone stepped onto the stage and began the sword duel with Yu Wenji. But, whoosh! There was a flash of light. In just one move, Yu Wenji used the sword in his hand to knock away his opponent's sword. The tip of the sword was pressed against his opponent's neck. Next, Yu Wenji said indifferently. So fast. The pupils of Kai Ling, and Ku Mo shrank slightly as a grave expression appeared in their eyes. They were all people who had obtained at least 10 consecutive victories in the battle dojo. However, when they saw Yu Wenji, they felt an immense pressure. Hearing the uproar around him, Yu Wenji smiled and turned to look at Yi Guqin. However, he discovered that Yi Guqin's expression was calm, as if he was not surprised by his methods at all. Ha, pretending to be calm. Yu Wenji shook his head slightly. As expected of someone from a low-level dynasty, they only know how to use the indifference on the outside to conceal the panic in their hearts. But Yi Guqin really didn't care. In his eyes, Yu Wenji's swordsmanship was indeed impressive, but that was all. Yu Wenji pursued speed, but it was full of flaws. Yi Guqin had no less than 10 ways to block the path of Yu Wenji's sword and restrict his sword moves. Even Su Jianxue found it a little boring. She had obtained the true inheritance of the Emperor's sword and was born with the enlightened sword heart. Her understanding of the sword far surpassed Yu Wenji's. Just when Yi Guqin was feeling bored, a chuckle attracted his attention. He shifted his gaze slightly and saw a young man wearing ordinary clothes and a mask leaning lazily against a pillar in the corner of the hall. That chuckle was filled with disdain. Clearly, he was looking down on Yu Wenji. Yi Guqin slightly furrowed his brows. He sensed a familiar aura from the masked young man. Enlightened sword heart. Yi Guqin was surprised. He never expected to encounter someone with the enlightened sword heart in the battle dojo. Although the enlightened sword heart was only the first stage of comprehending the true essence of the sword, it wasn't something that anyone could comprehend. Perhaps only 1 in 10,000 sword cultivators would be able to comprehend it. As if sensing Yi Guqin's gaze, the youth also looked over. When their gazes met, the youth nodded slightly. Yi Guqin also returned the greeting. It looks like the battle dojo isn't that boring. Yi Guqin smiled faintly. During this time, Yu Wenji had already won 10 consecutive matches. Even the maidservant had a look of admiration on her face. She turned to Yi Guqin and asked calmly, "Sir, do you want to give it a try?" Compared to her previous enthusiastic tone, the maidservant's attitude was slightly cold. Clearly, it was because Yi Guqin had offended Yu Wenji. There's no hurry. Yi Guqin wasn't in a hurry anymore. Then, Yu Wenji won 20 consecutive matches. Then, he won 30 consecutive matches. Weak, too weak. A sword cultivator from a low-level empire is too weak. Is there no one stronger? Yu Wenji shook his head slightly. The surrounding sword cultivators from the Saint Origin dynasty flushed red when they heard this, but they didn't dare to say anything. This was because Yu Wenji's strength was indeed impressive. If the sword sect's Yi Guqin was here, the other dynasties wouldn't have the qualifications to show off. Some sword cultivators secretly said. Most of the sword cultivators here were from the Saint Origin mansion, and Yi Guqin had never been to the Saint Origin mansion. Therefore, it was natural that they didn't know Yi Guqin. Yi Guqin, can a low-level empire's sky pride be considered a sky pride? I can suppress him with a single sword. Yu Wenji sneered when he heard this. He had heard of Yiguchen's achievements in the past few days, but he still felt disdain towards them. He didn't believe the rumors that were spreading around. Boring, too boring. Let's leave it at that. At 40 consecutive matches, Yuwenji took the initiative to give up because he felt that it was too boring. He turned to look at Yiguchen and said indifferently, "Could it be that you're only here to stare? Don't you dare to fight?" Yiguchen didn't reply. He casually walked up to the arena, took out his Xianming broadsword, and said calmly, "Let's begin." Many sword cultivators below the arena were puzzled when they saw the pitch-black broadsword in Yiguchen's hand. It was rumored that the sword sect's Yiguchen used 2 swords, and one of them was the pitch-black broadsword. However, as Yiguchen's reputation spread throughout the dynasty, he became a role model for many sword cultivators. Therefore, many sword cultivators also began to practice the broadsword. This was because they didn't recognize Yiguchen's identity immediately. A sword cultivator went up to the arena. Yiguchen nodded his head and made his move. 1 sword. It was just 1 sword. Yiguchen didn't use any moves. Just the oppressive force of the Xianming broadsword was enough to make that sword cultivator fall off the arena. Yuwenji glanced sideways and was a little surprised, but his eyes were still cold. Kei Ling, and Ku Mo didn't pay attention. In their opinion, a native of the Saint Origin dynasty wasn't worth paying attention to. On the other hand, the slightly lazy masked young man stared intently at Yiguchen. With a faint smile, he muttered to himself, "Interesting. I did not expect that there would be such a talented sword cultivator in this low-level empire." Chapter 657. Yiguchen came to the battle sword hall to hone his sword skills. But to be honest, in terms of sword skills, his realm had already surpassed many peerless experts. After all, he was the sword demon who had ruled the world with his sword for decades. His sword skills had already reached the level of returning to the origin, and he could perform any sword skills perfectly. The second person was defeated by Yiguchen with a single strike. Then the third, the fourth, as time passed, one sword cultivator after another was defeated by Yiguchen. Yuwenji's expression changed from one of coldness and disdain to one of astonishment and disbelief. When Yiguchen defeated the 42nd person, Yuwenji's expression froze. Yiguchen had surpassed him. The entire battle sword hall was dead silent, and the spectators did not dare to make a sound. Yiguchen struck again, and the number of people he defeated had reached 50. Among them were some top sword cultivators from other dynasties. Who is this person? Is he really from the Saint Origin dynasty? Kei Ling, who did not pay attention to Yiguchen, raised her eyebrows slightly and began to pay attention to him. This person's sword skills are almost perfect. Ku Mo from the Xianming dynasty had a solemn look in his eyes. If Yiguchen did not say that he was from the Saint Origin dynasty, they would have thought that Yiguchen was a genius from a high-ranked dynasty or even a top dynasty. The maid who received Yiguchen had her mouth wide open, and she was speechless. She had joked about winning 100 matches in a row to lure Yiguchen into the trap. But now, it seemed that it was not impossible. Who is this young master? Beads of sweat appeared on the maid's forehead. She regretted that she had forgotten to ask for his name. At this moment, a fiery red figure stepped onto Yiguchen's arena. She was in a red dress, and her figure was as beautiful as a raging flame. It was the female sword cultivator from the Vermilion Bird dynasty, Kei Ling, I am Kei Ling, from the Vermilion Bird Palace of the Vermilion Bird dynasty. Please enlighten me. Kei Ling said in a delicate voice. Come. Yiguchen raised his sword. Whoosh. Kei Ling made her move immediately. The fiery red sword in her hand drew a streak of flame. Although there were restrictions set up by the formation and the people fighting could only compete with their sword skills, Qiao Ling's sword was still as swift as fire. There seemed to be the faint cry of a vermilion bird. Yiguchen's expression was calm. The heavy sword in his hand turned slightly like a shield, directly blocking Kei Ling's sword momentum. Heavenly fire ablaze. Kei Ling twisted her slender waist and changed the direction of her sword. The tip of the sword cut through the void as if a ball of flame had exploded. At the same time, a faint blazing sword essence spread out from her body. It's actually sword intent. The entire sword battle hall was shaken. Sword intent could be said to be something that all sword cultivators yearn for even in their dreams, but those who could comprehend it were few and far between. Kei Ling's eyes revealed a wisp of pride. She said with a hint of pride, "Can you take my fire sword intent?" Yi Guqin could not help but laugh. For someone like him who possessed the 5 elements sword intent, the fire sword intent was nothing. However, Yi Guqin did not display his sword intent. Instead, he used a sword move to break it. Immortal Slaying Sword Technique, Immortal Slaying. A sword crossed the sky. Although there was no chi, its power was still extremely strong. Boom! The fire sword intent was destroyed, and Kei Ling was knocked out of the battle arena. I lost. Kei Ling was absent-minded and puzzled. She had even displayed the fire sword intent, but she still lost. That's the immortal slaying sword technique of the Baiming family. How did he know it? Below the stage, the masked young man who was leaning against a remote corner muttered to himself in surprise. "Who are you?" Kei Ling bit her lip stubbornly and said. "Sword Sect Tower, Yi Guqin." Yi Guqin said lightly. "What? He's Yi Guqin. Oh my god, it's really Yi Guqin. Am I seeing things?" Sure enough, I had some guesses when I saw that heavy sword. I never thought that I would be lucky enough to meet Sword Sect Master Yi. Like a stone that stirred up 1,000 ripples, the entire battle sword dojo was in an uproar. Many sword cultivators were so excited that their faces turned red. The current Yi Guqin was not a legend in the Saint Origin dynasty, but he was close to it. He's Yi Guqin. Yu Wenji frowned. Even so, he still did not put Yi Guqin in his eyes. "Yi Guqin, your cultivation is only at the Divine Soul 9 transformation?" Kei Ling was slightly surprised when she heard that. Then, she seemed to have thought of something and asked. "Yes." Yi Guqin nodded lightly. "Sigh, it's a pity that the Divine Soul 9 transformation can't do much in the preliminaries." Kei Ling shook her head slightly, feeling a little regretful. Yi Guqin's sword skills were extraordinary, but his cultivation level was still not comparable to the elites of the mid-tier and high-tier dynasties. Yi Guqin smiled casually and did not mind. Dark Nether Dynasty, Black Death Sword Kumo. At this moment, a black-clothed man with a cold aura jumped onto the arena. "Come," Yi Guqin said. Next, Kumo was defeated in 10 simple moves. However, Kumo's expression did not change at all. He said, "Sword skills are fine, but if you use your true chi, you're not my opponent." Yi Guqin ignored him. These elites seem to only judge a person's strength by their cultivation level. Next, Yi Guqin's winning streak reached 70 matches. Even the Battle Sword Dojo's deputy dojo master was shocked. Could it be that Yi Guqin was going to break the record? The maidservant's face was pale, and her back was covered in cold sweat. She originally wanted to take advantage of a fool, but in the end, she took advantage of Yi Guqin. If Yi Guqin really broke the record, he would take 5 million crystal jades from the Battle Sword Dojo. At this moment, the Battle Sword Dojo's deputy dojo master looked at her sharply, causing her to tremble all over. "You're really something, trying to take advantage of the sword sect." The deputy dojo master shouted in a low voice, his face twitching. I don't know." The maidservant's face was full of panic, as if she had lost her parents. At this moment, Yu Wenji finally opened his mouth and said, "Ah, Yi Guqin, what a pity. If I'm not here, you might really be able to break the record. However, I won't let you get the 5 million crystal jades today." Yu Wenji directly jumped onto the fighting sword arena with a flash. Even Yu Wenji has made a move. He's a top genius from a high-tier dynasty. His sword skills are extraordinary. I wonder if Sword Seki can defeat Yuwenji. Seeing Yuwenji on the arena, the surrounding crowd was in an uproar. Countless eyes were focused on the two of them. Phew. Deputy Dojo Master, it seems like our battle sword dojo doesn't have to take out 5 million crystal jades. The maidservant patted her chest and let out a long sigh of relief. Her originally nervous expression also disappeared, and a faint smile appeared on her face. In her opinion, Yuwenji should be stronger than Yiguchin in terms of identity, status, and strength. No matter how strong Yiguchin was, it was only limited to the Saint Origin dynasty. I hope so. The deputy dojo master said. His thoughts were rather complicated. Although he didn't want the battle sword dojo to lose 5 million crystal jades, he also didn't want the sword sect, which was famous throughout the Saint Origin dynasty, to be defeated by a genius from another dynasty. Chapter 658. Yiguchin, right? Perhaps you do have some reputation in the Saint Origin dynasty. However, you should know that there's always someone better than you out there. Yuwenji's tone was indifferent, as if he was lecturing a junior. He also thought that he was qualified to do so. However, Yiguchin said coldly, your mouth is more powerful than your sword. Ridiculous. It's just a 70-win streak. If it wasn't for my reluctance, breaking the record would be a piece of cake. Yuwenji's eyes flashed with a sharp light. He unsheathed the gorgeous longsword in his hand and stabbed it towards Yiguchin. It was extremely fast, like a bolt of lightning that cut through the air. Although it wasn't supported by true energy, its speed and power shocked everyone. Although this sword doesn't have any true energy, I'm afraid that even an expert in the 9th transformation of the Divine Soul Realm wouldn't be able to block it. Some of the sword cultivators who were watching the battle sighed. Full of flaws. Yiguchin shook his head. His feet flashed, and the Xianming heavy sword in his hand blocked the attack. It was as if he had predicted the path of Yuwenji's sword and directly cut it off. How is this possible? Yuwenji's face was filled with astonishment. The move he used was the king-level sword art of Prince Yu's mansion, the flowing light sword art. It was extremely fast. Not to mention the 9th transformation of the Divine Soul Realm, even people of the same level would find it difficult to see the path of his sword. However, Yiguchin didn't even look at it and directly judged the path of his sword. Again. Yuwenji didn't believe it and attacked again. This time, there were more than 10 streaks of sword shadows, which were like flowing lights, coming at Yiguchin from all directions. Every sword shadow was extremely fast. I can't block this move. Kei Ling-er's eyes were extremely solemn. As expected of a high-tier dynasty. Kumo sighed. Under everyone's gaze, the Xianming heavy sword in Yiguchin's hand resonated with the void, and an invisible sword wave shook the void. He didn't use any true energy, but simply let the heavy sword resonate with the void to create a vibration wave. Boom! More than 10 sword shadows were all shattered. Yiguchin's footsteps flashed as his heavy sword slashed down from the sky, bringing with it an incomparably ferocious shockwave. Yuwenji was unable to dodge in time and was struck by the sword wave, causing a wisp of fishy sweetness to surge into his mouth before he spat out a mouthful of blood. Boom! Yiguchin did not hold back. He swept the flat of his sword at Yuwenji, slamming him onto the stage like he was slamming dough. Yuwenji vomited blood again. Dead silence. The entire place was dead silent. The faces of Kei Ling-er, Kumo, and the others froze. Their eyes were filled with shock and disbelief. Yuwenji was like a dead dog as he was crushed to the ground by Yiguchin. This scene was beyond their expectations. Stop! The old man who followed Yuwenji shouted. Just as he was about to intervene, he was stopped by the vice hall master. I'm sorry, but there are rules in the sword battle hall. If you don't admit defeat or get knocked off the stage, the battle can't end. Can you bear the consequences of injuring our young prince? The old man said with a cold expression. This is the Saint Origin dynasty. The vice hall master frowned. On the stage, Yuwenji collapsed onto the ground like a dead chicken as he vomited blood. Although he had the cultivation of the great profound martial realm, there was an array engraved on the stage that suppressed his true energy. No matter how strong you are, there is always someone better than you. Ye Guqin kicked Yuwenji out of the arena. Puff! Yuwenji vomited blood again. His eyes were bloodshot as he stared at Ye Guqin. How dare you provoke the great Yu dynasty, Prince Yu's mansion, and me? Ye Guqin, how dare you? Yuwenji's expression was terrifying. As the young prince of Prince Yu's mansion, he had never suffered such humiliation. How can you call yourself a sword cultivator with such a temperament? Ye Guqin shook his head. It was an insult to the sword for such a person to use it. Ignoring Yuwenji's threat, Ye Guqin continued to challenge his opponents. 80 consecutive victories, 90 consecutive victories, 100 consecutive victories. When Ye Guqin reached 100 consecutive victories, the entire sword battle dojo was in an uproar. Countless people rushed into the sword battle dojo, causing the street to be extremely lively. The street in front seems to be quite lively. Cousin, let's go take a look. Yan Xiaotang, Yan Wushuang, and the others were not far from the sword battle dojo. Up to you. Yan Wushuang's tone was indifferent. They also walked towards the sword battle dojo. The sword battle dojo was bustling with noise. After setting the record of 100 consecutive victories, no one dared to challenge Ye Guqin anymore. The maidservant slumped to the ground, her face pale. The vice hall master of the sword battle dojo sighed. Although he had lost 5 million, he was still happy to see Ye Guqin crushing the geniuses of the other dynasties. Just as Ye Guqin was about to get off the stage, a figure floated onto the stage like a withered leaf. It was the young man with the mask. So you're Ye Guqin from the sword sect? Please enlighten me. The masked young man flipped his hand and a long sword appeared in his hand. Who's that masked young man? I don't know. I've never heard of this person. The surrounding people were puzzled when they saw the masked young man. Even K Ling, Ku Mo, and the others from the other dynasties didn't know the masked young man's identity. Please. Facing the masked young man, Ye Guqin didn't relax in the slightest. After all, he was someone who had comprehended the enlightened sword heart. His strength wouldn't be weak. Whoosh! The masked young man's long sword swept over. The sword momentum was graceful and agile, but it had a hidden charm. Compared to the sword moves of Yuwenji and the others, it was much more advanced. Interesting. Ye Guqin's eyes lit up. He had finally met an interesting person. Clang! 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 The tips of the swords overlapped and sparks burst out. The two of them exchanged blows, and the afterimages of their swords were everywhere. The masked young man is so powerful. He's much more powerful than the young master of Prince Yu's mansion. Those with discerning eyes exclaimed. Yuwenji's face became even uglier. This battle lasted for an entire 15 minutes. In the end, the masked young man was still weaker than Ye Guqin, and the long sword in his hand was sent flying. I admit that I'm inferior to Brother Ye's swordsmanship. Although the masked young man lost, he let out a long laugh. Brother, your swordsmanship isn't bad either. I'm sure you're not a nobody. Ye Guqin's gaze was profound. Although the masked young man's swordsmanship was hidden, most of them were superior king swordsmanship. There were even traces of emperor swordsmanship. Thus, one could see that he was at least from a high-class dynasty. Brother Yi, we'll meet again. The masked young man smiled. His body flashed and he disappeared before everyone's eyes. Interesting person. Ye Guqin smiled faintly. After his 100-win streak, Ye Guqin wasn't going to continue. He walked down from the arena. The vice master stepped forward and bowed with a smile. Congratulations, Sword Sect Yi, for breaking our record. 5 million crystal jades are being mobilized. No need. I was just excited to see you. Ye Guqin waved his hand casually. If he didn't have 1,000,000 heaven crystals, he wouldn't be able to ignore the 5,000,000 crystal jades. But now, he could be considered to be quite wealthy. That won't do. Sword Sekyi has one back face for the Saint Origin dynasty. The 5,000,000 should be given to you. The vice master solemnly said. Su Jianshi, take it. Yi Guqin said. Okay. Su Jianshi nodded. Just as they were about to leave the sword battle hall, they were stopped by Yu Wenji. What's the meaning of this? Yi Guqin said faintly. Do you dare to fight again? Show me your full strength. Yu Wenji's face was filled with unwillingness as he stared at Yi Guqin. I'm not interested. Yi Guqin's expression was indifferent. Ha, you're really only at the 9 transformations of the divine soul. Even if your sword skills are good, your strength is nothing. Yu Wenji thought that Yi Guqin was afraid. On the other side, Kei Ling, and Ku Mo shook their heads. Yi Guqin's sword skills had indeed surprised them. It could be said that even in a high-tier dynasty, there weren't many people whose sword skills were as perfect as Yi Guqin's. But in terms of strength, Yi Guqin, who was born in a low-tier dynasty, was far inferior to them. It's a pity. If Yi Guqin was born in a high-tier dynasty, his strength would be more than enough to crush Yu Wenji. But now, it seems that he might not even be able to pass the preliminaries. Kei Ling shook her head regretfully. Get out of my way. Yi Guqin said coldly. You're acting like you're the best in the world. Are you afraid now? Yu Wenji sneered. At this moment, a voice suddenly came from the entrance of the sword battle hall. Isn't this the young prince of King Yu's residence? Why don't you give me, Yan Xiaotang, some face? A group of people walked in. It was Yan Xiaotang and the others. Chapter 659. Oh, so it's Crown Prince Yan of the Swallow Cloud Dynasty. Yu Wenji's tone softened when he saw Yan Xiaotang. The Swallow Cloud Dynasty was the same as the Great Yu Dynasty. They were both high-ranking dynasties. Yan Xiaotang was also the crown prince. His status and strength were not lower than his, so Yu Wenji treated him as an equal. Ha, this brother Yi is somewhat related to this Yan. I wonder if you can let him go on account of this Yan. Yan Xiaotang said with a faint smile. This. Yu Wenji frowned. On the other hand, Yi Guqin's expression became even colder. Let him go. It sounded as if Yi Guqin had been defeated by Yu Wenji. Su Jianshi was also very uncomfortable when she heard that. She frowned. But this person is too ignorant. He actually dared to offend me. Yu Wenji still wanted to get back at him. Sigh, brother Yu is magnanimous. After all, a person's background will sometimes limit his vision. I'll remind him more in the future, Yan Xiaotang said gently. Since that's the case, I'll give Crown Prince Yan some face. Yu Wenji snorted and turned to look at Yi Guqin coldly. I'll let you go this time for Crown Prince Yan's sake. If there's a next time, I won't let you go. Yan Xiaotang was secretly pleased when he saw that Yu Wenji had relented. He said to Yi Guqin, why aren't you thanking brother Yu? Yi Guqin said indifferently, aren't you being a busybody? Why should I ask him to let me go? Yu Wenji's face darkened. Yan Xiaotang was a little embarrassed and annoyed at the same time. Brother Yu, how about you leave first? I'll persuade him, Yan Xiaotang said. Yu Wenji was about to leave. Will you participate in the preliminaries of the Battle of Heavenly Legends? Yi Guqin suddenly asked. Nonsense. Yu Wenji said coldly. That's good. Yi Guqin nodded and did not say anything else. If they met in the preliminaries, he would teach Yu Wenji an unforgettable lesson. Then, Yu Wenji left. Yi Guqin, you actually broke the record of the sword battle dojo. Yan Wushuang's eyes lit up as she stared at Yi Guqin. It's nothing, Yi Guqin said honestly. The reputation of my sword sect's tower forest is all thanks to you, junior brother Yi. Ji Ling giggled as well. At this moment, a discordant voice sounded out. Brother Yi, I warned you long ago that many people from the other dynasties have come to the imperial capital during this period of time, so you have to exercise restraint. What would you do if you offend someone you can't afford to offend? I helped you this time, but what about next time? Yan Xiaotang's tone was stern as he lectured. Cousin, that's enough. A trace of annoyance flashed in Yan Wushuang's eyes as she spoke indifferently. Cousin is teaching him how to behave, Yan Xiaotang said earnestly. There's no need. In my life, I do things according to my own whims. I don't need anyone to teach me. In the future, I don't need you to meddle in my affairs. Yi Guqin was slightly annoyed. You. Yan Xiaotang was speechless. At this moment, a figure suddenly squeezed in front of Yi Guqin from the crowd and said excitedly, Is it really young Master Yi Guqin? You are. Yi Guqin said. That's great. I'm from the Gongsun family. I didn't expect to meet young Master Yi here. Miss Gongsun can be saved, the person from the Gongsun family said excitedly. Gongsun Xiaoye. What's the matter? Yi Guqin asked. It's like this. The Duanmu family of the Skystar dynasty came to our Gongsun family to cause trouble. Miss Gongsun was so angry that she made a bet with Duanmu Yu of the Duanmu family. She had the younger generation blacksmiths of the two families compete. In the end, our Gongsun family suffered a crushing defeat. In the end, Miss Gongsun personally took action, but she still lost to Duanmu Yu. Not only did our Gongsun family have to pay for all the treasures, but even Miss Gongsun herself had to pay for it. The person from the Gongsun family said with a sad face. The Duanmu family of the Skystar dynasty? Yi Guqin frowned. On the other side, Yan Xiaotang frowned and said solemnly, The Skystar dynasty is a top dynasty with a false saint overseeing it. It seems to be related to the Starry Sword Pavilion. We can't provoke it. Starry Sword Pavilion. Yi Guqin's eyes immediately sharpened. Originally, he was a little hesitant, but now that he heard about the Starry Sword Pavilion, he no longer hesitated. Since the Skystar dynasty was related to the Starry Sword Pavilion, he couldn't turn a blind eye to it. Take me there, Yi Guqin said. Yes. The person from the Gongsun family was delighted and hurriedly nodded. Brother Yi, did you hear what I said? The Skystar dynasty is a top dynasty. If you cause trouble, even I can't protect you. Yan Xiaotang said solemnly. Yi Guqin ignored him and left with the person from the Gongsun family. Su Jianshi, Shui, Yan Wushuang, Ji Ling, Chu Qingqi, and the others followed behind Yi Guqin. Only Yan Feiling stayed by Yan Xiaotang's side. You. Yan Xiaotang's face turned pale. No one cared about him at all. They all left. Humph, without me, would Wenji let you go? Now you want to provoke the Skystar dynasty. Yan Xiaotang snorted coldly. Although his face was ugly, he still followed. After about 15 minutes, Yi Guqin and the others arrived at the weapon pavilion under the lead of the person from the Gongsun family. As a forging family, the Gongsun family naturally had their own shop. The shop in the imperial capital was called the Weapon Pavilion. At this moment, the inside and outside of the Divine Weapon Pavilion were completely surrounded by the crowd. This was because there was a forging competition going on inside. However, the result was not too surprising. As expected, the young lady from the Gongsun family lost. Of course. The Skystar dynasty is a top dynasty, and the Duanmu family is the top forging family in the Skystar dynasty. How can the Gongsun family compare to them? Yeah, I heard that Duanmu Yu was once lucky enough to receive guidance from the Beiyan Weapon Emperor, Xiao Gongsheng. TSK, the Beiyan Weapon Emperor is a big shot in the Nantian region. He's an 8-star forging master. Who knows how many tribulation divine weapons he has forged? That's right. Back then, in the South Horizon region, the North Yen Weapon King and the South Refining Saint were extremely famous. However, later on, the two of them had a blacksmithing competition. The South refining saint lost and his hands were crippled. In the end, his whereabouts were unknown. Quite a number of people were discussing this matter. In the weapon pavilion, a girl with pigtails and red makeup gritted her teeth and glared at the group of people opposite her. The person in the lead was a handsome young man with a playful smile on his face. He was Duanmuyu, the most outstanding forging genius of the younger generation in the Duanmu family of the Skystar dynasty. He was only in his 20s and was already a 4-star forging master. His forging talent was amazing. On the other side, Gong Sunyu, Gong Sun Xianlong, and the others were also there, but their faces were dark. Duanmuyu, don't go too far. Gong Sun Xiaoye said through gritted teeth. Ha, Miss Gong Sun, you said it yourself. If you lose, you'll hand over half of the Gong Sun family's treasury. At the same time, you'll be mine, Duanmuyu said with a faint smile. You deliberately angered me. Gong Sun Xiaoye's little face flushed red. Ha, a man can't go back on his word. Who else does the Gong Sun family have? Call them out. I'll accompany you, Duanmuyu said with a chuckle. Gong Sun Xiaoye was speechless. She was the most talented person in the younger generation of the Gong Sun family. Who else could be more powerful than her? However, a figure suddenly flashed in Gong Sun Xiaoye's mind. At that moment, a member of the Gong Sun family ran in, panting. He shouted with joy on his face, Yi Guchen is here. As soon as he said that, the entire weapon pavilion fell silent. Then, there was an uproar. Chapter 660. Is Yi Jianzong here? Is it really him? I heard that Yi Jianzong also knows how to forge, but it seems like he's just interested in it. The entire Divine Weapon Pavilion was in an uproar as everyone looked at the entrance. A group of people walked in from the entrance. It was Yi Guchen and the others. Young Master Yi. Gong Sun Xiaoye was pleasantly surprised. Whatever she wanted to do came true. Without any hesitation, she jumped to Yi Guchen's side and clung onto Yi Guchen like an octopus. Su Jianshi puffed her cheeks and looked at Yi Guchen with resentment. Did young Master Yi know that I'm here and came to save me? You're too kind. Gong Sun Xiaoye hugged Yi Guchen tightly. Get down. Yi Guchen felt a headache coming on. Gong Sun family's little Chili's personality was as usual. Ha, Xiaoye, come down. Young Master Yi is here at the Divine Weapon Pavilion. Seeing Yi Guchen's arrival, Gong Sun Yu and Gong Sun Xuanlong's dark faces relaxed. Hearing this, Gong Sun Xiaoye reluctantly let go of her hand. Gong Sun Xiaoye, our bet isn't over yet, Duanmuyu said from the other side. Our Gong Sun family hasn't lost yet. With young Master Yi here, you can't win. Gong Sun Xiaoye puffed out her chest confidently. Yi Guchen was the only one among the younger generation in the entire Saint Origin dynasty who could defeat her in forging. Hence, she was very confident in Yi Guchen. Oh, is young Master Yi a blacksmith? Duanmuyu narrowed his eyes and looked at Yi Guchen. Although young Master Yi doesn't specialize in forging, his talent is definitely not inferior to yours, Gong Sun Xiaoye said confidently. Not inferior to me? Ha! Ridiculous. Duanmuyu shook his head. Beside him, someone came forward and told him about Yi Guchen. Gong Sun Xiaoye, is there no one else in your Gong Sun family? To think that a sword cultivator would dare participate in the competition. After hearing about Yi Guchen, Duanmuyu's voice turned slightly cold. He did not care about Yi Guchen's achievements. He only knew that Yi Guchen was not a professional blacksmith. It was an insult to him to compete with such a person. Hearing Duanmuyu's words, the spectators around the Divine Weapon Pavilion started whispering to each other. Although this sword master Yi is powerful, he seems to be a sword cultivator. How can he help in forging? I've heard that Sword Sect Yi hid his identity in northern Liang City and participated in the blacksmith convention, revealing his extraordinary talent in forging. So what? Yi Jianzong's talent in forging can't be as strong as his talent in sword Dao. Moreover, Duanmuyu is a genius of a top dynasty. Many people in the surroundings were discussing animatedly. However, most of them were not optimistic about Yi Guqin's chances. Although they had heard about Yi Guqin's participation in the blacksmith convention. However, that level of convention could not be compared with Duanmuyu's level. Oh, you think I'm not qualified to compete with you? Yi Guqin looked at Duanmuyu indifferently. Although he did not want to get involved, the Star Dynasty where the Duanmu family was located had some relationship with the Starry Sword Pavilion. Secondly, the Gongsun family was also an ally of the Sword Sect talent, so Yi Guqin could not turn a blind eye to it. Duanmuyu chuckled and did not say anything, but it was obvious that he thought so. Don't look down on people. Gongsun Xiaoye gritted her teeth in anger. Then what do I have to do to compete? Yi Guqin did not mind and said indifferently. Since you insist on competing, then fine. I'll take out 100 kinds of ores and materials. If you can identify them all in 15 minutes and get them all correct, I'll consider you a blacksmith, Duanmuyu said indifferently. This. Gongsun Xiaoye and the others' faces froze. The Duanmu family was from a top dynasty, so they had all kinds of top materials that were not available in the Saint Origin dynasty. Obviously, Duanmuyu did not want to give Yi Guqin a chance to compete. You're bullying people. Gongsun Xiaoye gnashed her teeth in anger. The rest of the Gongsun family members were also angry. On the contrary, Gongsun Yu looked at Yi Guqin with flickering eyes. Since Yi Guqin could take out such a master's letter, it was obvious that his vision was not limited to the Saint Origin dynasty. Yi Guqin smiled faintly. Just as he was about to speak, Yan Xiaotang interrupted him. However, Yan Xiaotang interrupted, Brother Yi, aren't you messing around? You're a sword cultivator, not an artificer. How can you compare to Brother Duanmu? Don't create more trouble here. In his opinion, the Sky Star dynasty was a top dynasty, and the Duanmu family was also a top blacksmith family. They were not people that Yi Guqin could provoke. He was not thinking for Yi Guqin, but he was afraid that Yi Guqin would implicate Yan Wushuang and the others. You are. Duanmuyu glanced at Yan Xiaotang. I'm Yan Xiaotang from the Swallow Cloud dynasty. My brother is not sensible, and he's not a blacksmith. Sorry for making a fool of himself. Yan Xiaotang smiled apologetically. Although he was proud, he was not qualified to be proud in front of a top dynasty. Swallow Cloud dynasty. Duanmuyu nodded. Why aren't you leaving? Yan Xiaotang shouted. Yan Xiaotang, you're too much. Yan Wushuang was also a little angry. Get out of my way. Yi Guqin's face was indifferent. I'm doing this for your own good. Yan Xiaotang said. You're so full of yourself. Yi Guqin ignored Yan Xiaotang and turned to Duanmuyu and said, take them out. Duanmuyu sighed. With a wave of his hand, 100 types of minerals were listed out. All kinds of crystals and minerals shone brightly. For a moment, the whole hall was dazzled by the brilliance. There were many blacksmiths in the Divine Weapon Pavilion, and there was no lack of experienced blacksmiths. However, when they looked at the 100 types of minerals, they were all a little stunned. Why can I only recognize a dozen types? I can only recognize 20 types at most. Many of the blacksmiths looked a little dazed after looking at them. Even a master blacksmith like Gongsun Yu could only recognize 60 to 70 types. This is too difficult. Gongsun Xiaoye was dizzy from looking at them. It was almost impossible to recognize all of them, not to mention there was a time limit of 15 minutes. She looked at Yi Guqin worriedly. These 100 types of minerals were much more difficult to recognize than the minerals displayed at the blacksmith's conference. I was kind enough to help you out so that you wouldn't get into trouble. Now, you've suffered the consequences of your own actions. Let's see how you're going to get out of this. Yan Xiaotang shook his head. He did not believe that Yi Guqin had any talent in blacksmithing. After all, Yi Guqin's talent in swordsmanship had already surprised him. If he had an extraordinary talent in blacksmithing, how could others live? Just wait and see. Yi Guchen won't be able to get out of this embarrassing situation, Yan Xiaotang said coldly. Yan Feiling nodded repeatedly, agreeing with Yan Xiaotang's words. Yan Wushuang, on the other hand, looked worried. 15 minutes. That's too long. Yi Guchen smiled faintly and shook his head. Chapter 661. Yi Guchen had inherited the old drunkard's skills. Although he didn't know the old drunkard's true identity, he could imagine that he must have been a big shot in the forging world in the South Horizon region. The old drunkard's knowledge in forging was above the South Horizon region and even the entire 9 regions. And Duan Muyu's knowledge was only limited to the top dynasties. So this kind of challenge was really not difficult for Yi Guchen. You only have 15 minutes. Seeing that Yi Guchen seemed to be indifferent, Duan Muyu curled his lips and said. Yi Guchen didn't say much and casually glanced at it. Star rhyme stone. Iron wood essence. Wood essence iron. Too muddy. Yu Hua wood. With every step Yi Guchen took, he spoke without the slightest pause. With a glance, he reported the materials that he saw. The entire divine weapon pavilion was so quiet that one could hear a pin drop. Only Yi Guchen's voice that didn't stop resounded in the divine weapon pavilion. Does Yi Jianzong know all of these materials? But why do I feel that Yi Jianzong is just talking nonsense? He doesn't even have time to think. Many blacksmiths were puzzled. They hadn't even seen the materials before, but Yi Guchen could casually mention them. More importantly, he didn't even pause. In other words, Yi Guchen didn't even think and directly spoke. Was that possible? Pfft, Brother Yi is really looking for trouble. What's the point of making things up? Yan Xiaotang shook his head in disappointment. From his point of view, Yi Guchen was simply putting on a show. Can you shut up? Yan Wushuang's eyes flashed with a trace of annoyance. If the auction didn't need Yan Xiaotang's financial help, she really wanted to get rid of him. I'm just telling the truth, Yan Xiaotang said sourly. However, what everyone didn't notice was that as Yi Guchen spoke, Duan Muyu's expression became more and more serious. There was also a trace of surprise in his eyes. Yi Guchen's performance surprised him. In just a few moments, Yi Guchen had finished identifying all 100 materials. Young Master Duanmu, what's the result? Someone asked curiously. Gongsun Xiaoye and the others were also nervous. Yi Guchen couldn't even pass this hurdle, let alone compete with Duan Muyu. Duan Muyu wanted to say something but hesitated. Actually, he had originally looked down on Yi Guchen. However, what Yi Guchen said turned out to be correct. It made him feel as if he had been slapped in the face. However, at that moment, Yan Xiaotang stood out once again and said, Brother Duanmu, you don't need to care about our feelings. Brother Yi indeed needs to recognize reality. Not just anyone can become an artificer. So, whatever the result is, just directly state it. You. Duanmu Yu coldly glared at Yan Xiaotang. Was this person mocking him? Feeling Duanmu Yu's cold gaze, Yan Xiaotang's heart skipped a beat. How did he offend Duanmu Yu? Yi Guchen, is it? You do have some ability. You're all right. Duanmu Yu let out a deep breath and said indifferently. Although he didn't want to admit it, he couldn't lie in front of everyone and say that Yi Guchen was wrong. Ah. Did you see? What, all right. Before the faint smile on Yan Xiaotang's face could spread, the corners of his mouth completely froze. After a moment of dead silence, the entire divine weapon pavilion burst into an earth-shattering uproar. Such difficult materials, Yi Jianzong actually identified all of them correctly. Oh my god, I thought Yi Jianzong was just talking nonsense. In the end, they were all right. All kinds of surprised and astonished voices were incessant. Gongsun Xiaoye jumped 3 feet high in joy. Yi Guchen really didn't disappoint her. Gongsun Yu and Gongsun Xianlong also breathed a sigh of relief. As for Yan Xiaotang and Yan Feiling, their faces were extremely stiff. No. How is it possible? Isn't he a sword cultivator? How can he have such talent in forging? Yan Xiaotong's cheeks twitched in disbelief. This genius of a small dynasty that he had originally looked down on seemed to have broken his understanding again and again. I wonder if I'm qualified now. Ye Guqin said calmly with his hands behind his back. You do have some ability, but identifying materials is the most basic thing in the path of forging. Since you insist on competing with me in forging, then I can only let you experience what it means to be inferior. Duan Muyu's expression was indifferent. Although Ye Guqin's performance was beyond his expectations, Duan Muyu didn't care. However, Duan Muyu did not care. He was born in a family of blacksmiths in a top-tier dynasty. He was lucky enough to receive some guidance from the Beiyan weapon emperor, Shao Gong. Just this alone was enough to make him extraordinary on the path of forging. His opponents were the disciples of Shao Gong, as well as the geniuses of the forging sections. They were not the forging geniuses of these small dynasties. Therefore, Duan Muyu's expression was very calm. How do you want to compete? What are the stakes? Ye Guqin asked. It's very simple. The Gongsun family and I will each take out half of the materials in our treasury. You and I will choose the materials and forge. The one with the higher quality will win. As for the stakes, they have already been set. If I lose, I will give all my treasures to the Gongsun family and admit that the Gongsun family is better than the Duanmu family in forging. If you lose, half of the Gongsun family's treasures will be handed over. Gongsun Xiaoye will also lose to me. In addition, the entire Gongsun family will follow the Duanmu family's lead. Ye Guqin secretly shook his head. This bet was not fair. If Duanmu won, the entire Gongsun family would be under the Duanmu family's command. Your treasures are comparable to half of the entire Gongsun family's. Ye Guqin said playfully. Ha, I'll let you see. Duanmu showed a trace of disdain. With a wave of his hand, a large pile of treasures gushed out of his essence ring, dazzling everyone. Many blacksmiths in the pavilion were dumbfounded. Ye Guqin's eyes lit up as he glanced around. He saw one of the ores, which was buried among the many precious materials. Of course, it wasn't a chaos essence crystal. Is that a 9-orifice divine stone? Ye Guqin looked away calmly. However, he was surprised. That mineral was shaped like a human and there were 9 holes on it. Normal blacksmiths would definitely not be able to recognize what it was. Even Ye Guqin had only seen a brief record of it in the Heavenly Works mineral collection that the old drunkard gave him. The 9-orifice divine stone was born and nurtured by the earth. It meant that the 9 orifice points of the 9-orifice divine stone could absorb the spirit chi of heaven and earth and accumulate it for 10,000 years. This kind of mineral was more precious than the materials of the tribulation divine weapons. It was a sacred material that could be used to forge sacred weapons and even higher-level archaic swords. Ye Guqin's expression didn't change, but he was slightly shocked. Duanmu probably didn't recognize the 9-orifice divine stone. Otherwise, he wouldn't have taken it out as a bet. And Ye Guqin wanted to forge his own famed sword in the future. With the innate sword embryo as the foundation, if he could integrate the 9-orifice divine stone, then his famed sword would automatically absorb the spirit chi of heaven and earth and transform on its own. In other words, his sword, like a person, could automatically cultivate, advance, and transform. I must get the 9-orifice divine stone. Ye Guqin's eyes flashed. This was a necessary material for him to forge his own famed sword. Chapter 662. Ye Guqin had only wanted to help the Gongsun family. After seeing the 9-orifice divine stone, Ye Guqin had made up his mind to win. This kind of sacred material was too rare. Not to mention the 9-orifice divine stone, which was considered rare among sacred materials. Although Duanmu came from a top dynasty and had a certain level of vision, he was obviously limited. Otherwise, he would have recognized the 9-orifice divine stone and let it be buried in a pile of materials. How is it? How does my collection compare to the Gongsun family's? Seeing Ye Guqin's gaze, Duanmuyu's lips curled into a contemptuous smile. He secretly called Yi Guqin a country bumpkin. The materials he brought were only above average in the Duanmu family. But in the Saint Origin dynasty, they were the best. Gongsun Xiaoye and the others were also dazzled. Gosh, there's even rare spiritual soil. That's a material for forging tribulation divine weapons. The Gongsun family members were stunned. Although Duanmuyu did not bring as many materials as the Gongsun family, the quality was better. If the Gongsun family could get this batch of materials, they would have a great development. He seemed to have sensed the contempt in Duanmuyu's eyes. Yi Guqin shook his head. If Duanmuyu knew that the 9-aperture divine stone was one of the rare divine materials that he had taken out as a gambling stake, he would definitely regret it. After all, these sacred materials were rarer than sacred herbs. Let's start. Yi Guqin did not want to say more. He was determined to win this round. After that, the Gongsun family and Duanmuyu each took out half of the materials and mixed them together as a material warehouse. As for Duanmuyu and Yi Guqin, they would choose materials from the material storehouse to forge. Although both of them could identify all the materials. But in terms of forging, it was not as simple as picking the most precious materials. The fusion and compatibility between the materials was also very important. Many times, 2 ordinary materials could be transformed into a higher-grade material after being mixed with a special method. For example, Yi Guqin had fused the Frostfire Mystic Heart Essence with Fire Crystal, 100-Year Cold Heart Jade, and Cloud Marrow during the Blacksmith Convention. Similarly, if 2 materials with incompatible properties were to be forcefully fused together, they would instead become scrap. Therefore, the knowledge of material attributes was many times more complicated than identifying materials. The reason why Duanmuyu was so confident was because he had also received pointers from Xiao Gongshu in this regard. Yi Guqin, let's begin then. Let me see how capable you are, Duanmuyu said as he began to select the materials. Yi Guqin's expression was indifferent as he also began to choose. The entire divine weapon pavilion instantly fell silent. Everyone stared intently at the materials that the two of them had chosen. Duanmuyu casually picked up a very ordinary piece of sea cloud stone, and then picked up an even more ordinary piece of dark steel. Why would Duanmuyu use such ordinary materials? That's right. Doesn't he know that the rarer and more precious the material, the higher the quality of the divine weapon forged? Many blacksmiths were confused. However, the more it was so, the more solemn the faces of Gongsun Yu and the others became. This Duanmuyu is indeed not simple. Gongsun Xuanlong's face was even more worried. Dad, is there any mystery in the materials that Duanmuyu has chosen? Gongsun Xiaoye was confused. This Duanmuyu's forging vision is indeed extraordinary. There is a hint of returning to the natural state. I believe that when these ordinary materials are fused in his hands, the quality will definitely surpass those rare materials, Gongsun Yu said solemnly. After reading Yi Guqin's handwritten letter, Gongsun Yu also got his wish and became a 5-star forging master. Naturally, his vision was also higher. After this reminder, everyone was suddenly enlightened. Duanmuyu's realm was already 1 level higher than theirs. So what? Wasn't young Master Yi like this before? Gongsun Xiaoye muttered. Duanmuyu, who was selecting materials, smiled faintly. He glanced at the blacksmiths who were suddenly enlightened and couldn't help but sneer secretly. As expected of the blacksmiths of a small dynasty. They have no vision at all. Although the materials he chose were ordinary, when combined together, it would definitely shock everyone's eyes. And these were all casually mentioned to him by the Beiyan weapon emperor, Xiao Gongshu. I wonder what materials Yi Guqin will choose. Duanmuyu looked over. Everyone in the hall also shifted their gaze to Yi Guqin. They were shocked to find that the materials Yi Guqin had chosen were all rare materials. Moreover, 2 of the main materials, the vermilion bird stone and the phoenix feather golden crystal, were faintly homogenized. Such materials of similar quality were very difficult to fuse. Even if they were all top-grade materials, after fusing, they were likely to become scrap. Heh. Sure enough, I overestimated you. Do you only know how to choose top-grade materials randomly? Seeing Yi Guchen's choice, a hint of mockery appeared in Duan Muyu's eyes. This. Even Gong Sun Yu and Gong Sun Xuanlong's faces froze. They really couldn't understand Yi Guchen's choice. How ridiculous. If you don't have the strength, don't show off. Even people like me who don't know anything about blacksmithing know that the vermilion bird stone and the phoenix feather golden crystal are materials of the same attribute. It's difficult to fuse them together. Yan Xiaotang shook his head. His words were filled with extreme disappointment. Can you shut up? Yi Guchen has his own ideas, Yan Wushuang said coldly. Cousin, you don't know anything about blacksmithing. Let's see how he ends up, Yan Xiaotang said sourly. Even a layman like Yan Xiaotang knew that Yi Guchen's choice was ridiculous. Needless to say, the other blacksmiths didn't have to say anything. I really don't understand Yi Jinzong's choice. Maybe he has also mastered some kind of fusion method. These two materials don't improve at all after fusing. It's really difficult to let a sword cultivator forge. Perhaps the previous blacksmith convention was Yi Jinzong's limit. Many people around them sighed. They thought that perhaps Yi Guchen's forging skills were remarkable in the Saint Origin dynasty and could be ranked among the top. However, if he were to compete with someone of Duan Muyu's background, he would be overestimating himself. Hearing the faint sighs of the people in the hall, Gong Sun Xiaoye kept grinding her silver teeth, showing a little apprehension. It could be said that the Gong Sun family had placed all their bets on Yi Guchen this time. If Yi Guchen lost, the Gong Sun family would really be the subordinate of the Duanmu family. Even Gong Sun Xiaoye would belong to Duan Muyu. Young Master Yi, you can't lose Xiaoye to others. Gong Sun Xiaoye said bitterly in her heart. Looking at the size of the people around him and the contempt that Duan Muyu cast at him vaguely, Yi Guchen was secretly amused. How could Duan Muyu be able to compare with him in terms of experience? He had already used Duan Muyu's fusion method at the blacksmith convention. It was nothing to fuse ordinary materials into top-grade materials. Fusing top-grade materials into top-grade materials was called skill. Chapter 663. After a quarter of an hour, Yi Guchen and Duan Muyu had finished selecting their respective materials. Then, the two of them went to the forging room behind the Divine Weapon Pavilion. All of the onlookers followed after him. Since the forging room was made of transparent white crystal, everyone could see everything that was happening in the room. Duan Muyu took out his forging tools, especially the forging hammer. It was purple gold in color and had many array patterns on it. It looked mysterious and gorgeous. That's a supreme-grade mystical weapon. All the onlookers were stunned. In the Saint Origin dynasty, divine weapons were rare and supreme-grade mystical weapons were the strongest weapons. However, they did not expect Duan Muyu's forging hammer to be a supreme-grade mystical weapon. The forging hammer was not to be underestimated. There were some special spiritual inscription arrays on it that were very helpful for forging. Humph. A bunch of country bumpkins. Duan Muyu looked at them with disdain. In the Duanmu family, there were forging hammers that were at the same level as divine weapons. Of course, Duan Muyu could not use that level of forging hammers yet. However, this purple gold spiritual hammer was enough for now. Yi Guchen felt a little helpless. He did not specialize in forging, so he did not have his own forging hammer. As if sensing Yi Guchen's awkwardness, Gong Sun Xiaoye handed her fire cloud hammer to Yi Guchen. Thank you, Yi Guchen said calmly. However, Duan Muyu's disdain for Duan Muyu deepened when he saw this. Yi Guchen, are you a forging master or not? You don't even have your own forging hammer. Duan Muyu felt a little regretful. He felt that he was lowering his status by competing with Yi Guchen. The group of Duanmu family members also mocked Duan Muyu mercilessly. After all, Yi Guchen's performance was not that of a forging master. Yi Guchen did not mind. Forging was his hobby. If he did not want to forge his own sword, he would not have dabbled in forging. Duanmuyu's mood became more relaxed. He even felt that Gongsun Xiaoya's level might be higher than Yiguchen's. He also summoned his own flame. Duanmuyu activated the genuine qi in his body, and a strange silver flame burst out from his palm. It was mixed with specks of stars, like bright spots of light. It looked extremely dazzling and strange. As the flames rose, waves of special ripples spread out. That's Heaven and Earth Unique Flame. Everyone's eyes were attracted by the strange silver flame. Rumor has it that the 9 heavenly stars flame comes from the Starry Universe Sword Pavilion. It is a flame hidden in an ancient meteorite. Duanmuyu actually has it as well, Yan Xiaotang exclaimed. On the other hand, Yiguchen's expression darkened. He was not surprised by the 9 heaven stars' fire, but he was thinking about the relationship between the Star Dynasty and the Starry Sword Pavilion. It seemed that the relationship between the two wasn't that simple. The 9 heaven star flame that Duanmuyu took out also gave rise to an uproar. Among the heaven and earth unique flames, the 9 heaven star flame was considered a high-level flame. Not to mention, the 9 heaven star flame's unique star power had an amplifying effect on forging. In everyone's opinion, Duanmuyu's chances of winning were almost 90%. Gongsun Xiaoya and the others' faces also became ugly. Duanmuyu seemed to have crushed Yiguchen in all aspects. Yiguchen, on the other hand, was extremely calm. He also took out his own flame. The red flame surged out. It was the vermilion bird divine flame. His heavenly son Xianming flame was devoured by the nirvana demon flame, but the vermilion bird divine flame came from the vermilion bird totem, so it was preserved. Oh, beast flame! It's barely enough. Looking at Yiguchen's flame, Duanmuyu curled the corner of his mouth and revealed a faint disdain. Although the beast flame's quality was comparable to the heaven and earth unique flames, it was still not worth mentioning in his eyes. The onlookers were also puzzled. They all knew that Yiguchen should have heaven and earth unique flames. Even if it was not as good as the 9 heaven star flame, it should be barely usable. But now, Yiguchen did not even take out the heaven and earth unique flames. Has he given up on himself? Many onlookers shook their heads and sighed. Gongsun Xiaoya also bit her lip, feeling uncertain. Yiguchen was focused and did not care about the outside discussion. The vermilion bird stone is calcined with the vermilion bird divine flame and blended with blood-veined gold, red blood essence and other materials. After 100,000 refinements, it will undergo a qualitative transformation and become the vermilion bird blood amber. The phoenix feather golden crystal is forged with the nirvana demon flame and blended with heaven nether iron and other materials to become the ice phoenix chilling heart. Although the vermilion bird blood amber and the ice phoenix chilling heart have opposite attributes, if they are supplemented with yin-yang earth, xianyang wood and other materials, their quality can be increased by dozens of times. The materials can withstand the baptism of the heavenly tribulation and even be considered the top materials to forge heavenly tribulation divine weapons. Yiguchen muttered to himself. Of course, outsiders did not know what he was thinking. Moreover, this kind of forging method was too complicated and rare. Ordinary people did not know about it at all. Even Duanmu would never have thought of it. Not only could the combination of materials transform, but the use of flames of different attributes could also make the materials be reborn. After that, the two of them were immersed in forging. However, those with discerning eyes could see that as Duanmu blended some materials, the quality of the materials had greatly improved. I didn't expect that the sea cloud stone and dark iron could be combined with the heavenly jade to become the Black Sea heavenly jade. That is the material to forge heavenly tribulation divine weapons. Many blacksmiths looked at the shining materials in Duanmuyu's hands and could not help but gasp in admiration. He was indeed a genius from a top dynasty and a family of blacksmiths. They could not help but sigh at his strength. In addition to the fusion technique, the number of times Duanmu forged was also beyond their knowledge. It was more than 200,000 refinements, but it was enhanced by the forging hammer. One strike was equivalent to 5 strikes. As for Yi Gu Chen's fire cloud hammer, although it was also enhanced, it was not as obvious. However, his true qi was far more vigorous than Duanmuyu's. Duanmuyu was slightly surprised to see that Duanmuyu had forged 300,000 times. Finally, after 300,000 refinements, the vermilion bird stone that Yiguchen had forged had a qualitative transformation. Endless crimson light was emitted from the vermilion bird stone. Vaguely, everyone seemed to hear the cries of a vermilion bird. A crimson material with natural vermilion bird patterns imprinted on it appeared in front of them. Could that be the vermilion bird blood amber? That is also a top material that can be used to forge heavenly tribulation divine weapons. Yiguchen's move surprised everyone again. Many blacksmiths were stunned. They had no idea how Yiguchen had forged it. In fact, without the vermilion bird divine fire, Yiguchen would not have been able to forge the vermilion bird blood amber. Interesting. But if that's all, you can't beat me. Duanmuyu was also slightly surprised, but he still had a card up his sleeve. Then, Yiguchen began to forge the golden phoenix feather crystal. A pitch-black flame surged out of his palm again. Well, that's... Duanmuyu's expression suddenly froze. Because when the pitch-black flame appeared, his 9 heaven stars' fire shook as if it was being suppressed. It's a rare flame of heaven and earth. And it's not an ordinary rare flame of heaven and earth. Some of the blacksmiths around exclaimed. They had been wondering why Yiguchen did not use the rare flame of heaven and earth. But now that he had used it, everyone was shocked. Because the rare flame of heaven and earth that Yiguchen had used was even stronger than the 9 heaven stars' fire. Although your rare flame of heaven and earth is slightly higher than my 9 heaven stars' fire, in terms of forging, the 9 heaven stars' fire has a special advantage. Your flame is far from comparable, Duanmuyu said firmly. Yiguchen ignored him and began to forge the golden phoenix feather crystal. Chapter 664. Using the Nirvana demonic flame to forge the golden phoenix feather crystal. Hence, its attributes were tinged with a hint of coldness. The crowd was even more puzzled when they saw this. After all, the Suzaku blood amber was inclined towards the blazing attribute. If the attribute of the golden phoenix feather crystal was changed, wouldn't it be the opposite of the attribute? However, no one thought that Yiguchen was forging blindly. There must be some meaning behind it. Of course, Duanmuyu was still dismissive of it. On the contrary, Yan Xiaotang felt his cheeks burning. No matter whether Yiguchen won or lost in the end, he was worthy of being a blacksmith. At least in the younger generation of Saint Origin dynasty, there were not many who could compare with Yiguchen in forging. Time passed bit by bit. The forging between the two had almost reached the most critical moment. With a burst of light, Yiguchen's ice phoenix chilling heart was completed. The material that looked like it was condensed from ice attracted everyone's attention. Almost at the same time, Duanmuyu's materials were completed. Next was the most important part. He would use the forging technique to forge and merge all the materials together. Finally, he would create the weapon embryo and turn it into a finished product. Forging technique was the most important component of forging. It was the most important part. To measure a blacksmith's level, besides identifying materials, selecting materials, merging attributes, forging number of times, quality of fire and so on, there was also the forging technique. Superior forging techniques could increase the success rate of forging and improve the quality of the divine weapons forged. If it was an ordinary forging technique, the success rate would not be high, let alone improving the weapon's quality. Finally, it's time to use the forging technique. This is the biggest gap between you and me. Duanmuyu smiled proudly. Coming from a top forging family, Duanmuyu naturally did not lack in forging techniques. The Duanmu family's forging technique was not the best, but it was at least the best. In this small Saint Origin dynasty, how could there be such a high-level forging technique? At least Duanmuyu did not care about it. Everyone's eyes were fixed on the scene. However, most of them were looking at Duanmuyu. They were looking forward to Duanmuyu's Duanmu family's forging technique. Falling star forging technique. Duanmuyu shouted and the 9 heaven star fire burst out from his hand. Vaguely, a scene of stars appeared in the sky. And those materials were all floating in the starry scene, as if planets were colliding and fusing together. Is this the casting technique of the Duanmu clan? How miraculous! All the blacksmiths were dumbfounded. Regardless of how much Gongsun Xiaoye detested Duanmu Yu, she had no choice but to admit that the technique he had used was truly extraordinary. Those from the Gongsun clan looked at Zhang Xian worriedly. Those who originally had confidence in Yiguchen also began to waver. TSK, the Duanmu family's casting skills are indeed extraordinary. Yan Xiaotang sighed. Are you a member of the Duanmu family? Why are you siding with outsiders? Yan Wushuang couldn't stand it anymore. They were all worried about Yiguchen, but in the end, Yan Xiaotang actually encouraged his arrogance. I'm just speaking the truth. Brother Yi is indeed overestimating himself, Yan Xiaotang said indifferently. But to be honest, he was still willing to see Yiguchen suffer in the hands of Duanmu Yu. Seeing Duanmu Yu display the falling star casting technique, Yiguchen's eyes remained calm. The falling star casting technique was indeed good. But he had inherited many of the old drunkard's casting skills. The old drunkard's casting skills were definitely not something the Duanmu family could compare to. Yin-yang casting technique. Yiguchen also displayed a casting technique. The vermilion bird divine fire and nirvana demonic flame erupted at the same time, enveloping the vermilion bird blood amber, ice phoenix chilling heart, and other materials together. Everyone seemed to see two completely different flames faintly forming a world of yin and yang. One was cold and the other was hot. It was extremely strange. What kind of casting technique is Yiguchen using? Everyone's eyes once again turned to Yiguchen. This was because the casting technique he had displayed was actually not weaker than the falling star casting technique. This. Yan Xiaotang felt as if his face had been slapped swollen. He was speechless for a long time. Yan Wushuang, Su Jianshi, and the others secretly heaved a sigh of relief. Yiguchen was always able to exceed their expectations. Gongsun Xiaoye also patted her flat chest and let out a long sigh of relief. However, the worry on Gongsun Yu and Gongsun Xuanlong's faces did not disappear. Duanmu Yu should still have a trump card that he hasn't used yet, Gongsun Xianlong said in a deep voice. As expected, Duanmu Yu's face darkened slightly when he saw Yiguchen display the yin-yang casting technique. However, his eyes were still filled with confidence. You're quite capable to force me to use this technique. Fortunately, I obtained this technique from Master Xiao Gongshu. The corner of Duanmu Yu's mouth curled up. Blood spirit technique. Duanmu Yu bit the tip of his tongue and dripped a drop of blood essence onto the rough embryo. What he was casting was a thin saber. At this moment, the thin saber embryo seemed to have gained spirituality after being touched by the blood essence. It buzzed and trembled, and an incomparably bright brilliance accompanied by a sharp fluctuation spread out in all directions. What technique is that? It can actually give a divine weapon a trace of spirituality. Although it's very shallow, it's still commendable. All the blacksmith's eyes were wide open. It was not as simple as dripping a drop of blood essence. There must be a special technique involved. The corner of Duanmu Yu's mouth curled up into a smug smile. The blood spirit technique was casually taught to him by Xiao Gongshu. In Xiao Gongshu's words, it was just a small technique. However, to Duanmu Yu, it was a trump card. Yiguchen, how can you compare to me? Duanmu Yu shook his head and smiled. The noise in the square was still incessant. Gongsun Xiaoye bit her lips tightly and did not say a word. Gongsun Yu and Gongsun Xianlong also sighed and shook their heads. The result was already decided. Although Yan Xiaotang did not say anything, he sighed as if he had expected this. Yan Wushuang and Su Jianshi pursed their lips tightly and did not say a word. Everyone thought that the dust seemed to have settled. After using his trump card, the blood spirit technique, Duanmu Yu's victory was set. However, Yiguchen's expression did not change at all. Duanmu Yu's method was indeed beyond his expectations. Could it be that his secret technique came from Xiao Gongshu? Yi Guqin thought to himself. He had heard from others that Duanmu Yu had received some guidance from Bei Yan Weapon Emperor. However, Yi Guqin knew that the old drunkard's strength should not be weaker than Bei Yan Weapon Emperor. If that's the case, then... Yi Guqin smiled faintly. Can you still smile at this time? Duanmu Yu snorted when he saw Yi Guqin's smile. You're not the only one who has a way to improve the quality of a divine weapon. Yi Guqin sighed in his heart. Then, he also used a secret forging technique. Secret technique, Spirit Ascension. Yi Guqin's vital energy gushed out like a volcano and completely drowned the rough forging embryo. Waves of vigorous spiritual qi were brewing within it. What kind of secret technique is this? Yi Guqin's move made the whole place dead silent. No one could make a sound. Duanmu Yu's face turned red as if he was being strangled. Chapter 665. A secret technique that could directly improve the quality of a divine weapon was extremely rare. At least in the top forging families like the Duanmu family, there was no secret technique that could directly improve the quality of a divine weapon. If not for Xiao Gongshu's guidance, Duanmu Yu would not have been able to master such a secret technique. This was also Duanmu Yu's trump card. He knew that other than those geniuses who were born in the overlord forces or those who specialized in forging, no other forging geniuses would be able to master such a secret technique. But now, Yi Guqin had also performed such a secret technique. Duanmu Yu's eyes almost popped out of their sockets. A strange flame of heaven and earth, a special forging technique, and such a secret technique. As a forging master, Yi Guqin's foundation was not inferior to Duanmu Yu's. Where did this person come from? Is he really a native of the Saint Origin dynasty? Duanmu Yu tried his best to remain calm, but he did not believe it. With such a forging foundation, no one would doubt that he came from a top forging family. Of course, he did not know that Yi Guqin had inherited the old drunkard's skills. Even so, I might not lose to you. Can your two main materials be perfectly combined? Duanmu Yu comforted himself. After all, the vermilion bird blood amber and the ice phoenix heart chill had conflicting attributes. Even if they could be combined, the quality would not be improved by much. It was the same with the help of the secret technique. Duanmu Yu was not the only one who had seen through it. Most of the others had also seen through it. Gongsun Xiaoye and the others were also worried. Yi Guqin had indeed exceeded their expectations. However, the final outcome would still depend on the outcome of the battle. Time passed by slowly. Everyone from the Gongsun family had cold sweat on their foreheads. They had placed all their bets on Yi Guqin. Boom! Finally, accompanied by a violent explosion, Duanmu Yu's thin saber was finally formed in a dazzling flame. The flame dispersed, and a gorgeous and bright silver saber appeared in front of everyone's eyes. The streamlined blade glowed with a mercury-like brilliance. The most peculiar thing was that there seemed to be spots of light on the saber. This was the blessing of the 9 heavens star fire. What a beautiful saber! Some of the girls present were dazzled. It had to be said that Duanmu Yu's forging skills were top-notch. This saber was like a work of art. As expected of the Duanmu clan. Although it did not incorporate any spiritual seals or formations, its quality has probably reached the level of a mystical pattern divine weapon. TSK. A mystical rune divine weapon. That is a weapon that can only be forged by a 5-star blacksmith and above. This Duanmu Yu is only a 4-star blacksmith, yet he is able to forge a weapon that is comparable to a mystical rune divine weapon. Many of the blacksmiths present were full of praise. At the same time, he looked at the members of the Gongsun family with pity. The most famous blacksmith family in the Saint Origin dynasty would most likely fall under the Duanmu family. Seeing this, Gongsun Xiaoye's little face turned deathly pale, and her red lips trembled slightly. Gongsun Xianlong and Gongsun Yu also let out deep sighs, their faces filled with worry. Nowadays, not many people cared about the weapons that Yi Guqin forged. This was because the weapons that Duan Muyu forged had almost exceeded the limit of his star level. Heh! It's barely passable. Among the weapons that I have forged, it's not the best, Duan Muyu said pretentiously. However, the hint of joy in his eyes betrayed him. It was obvious that he had not expected Duan Muyu to be able to forge a weapon of such quality. Ha, I don't think there's a need to compete anymore, Duan Muyu said with a faint smile as he turned to look at Gongsun Xiaoye and the others. The members of the Gongsun family remained silent. Sigh, I told Brother Yi not to overestimate himself. In the end, he dragged others down with him. Yan Xiaotang shook his head. Yan Wushuang bit her red lips. She did not believe that Yi Guqin would lose. Just as everyone was sighing inwardly. On Yi Guqin's side, an unusually strong wave of energy spread out. The vermilion bird's blood amber and the ice phoenix's chilling heart were completely merged in the two balls of flames. What surprised everyone was that they did not feel any sense of disharmony. The two top-grade materials were perfectly fused together. How is this possible? Duan Muyu stared at the center of the flames in a daze. The corners of Yi Guqin's mouth curled up into a smile. It would have been impossible if he had used a normal method. However, by adding some supplementary materials and using the yin-yang casting technique, the impossible became possible. It's about time. Yi Guqin muttered to himself. At that moment, everyone seemed to hear the cries of the vermilion bird and the long cry of the ice phoenix. Under everyone's gaze, an incomparably dazzling long sword was born from the flames. Boom! A wave of icy cold power swept out along with the blazing flames. Everyone looked over and saw a magnificent long sword bobbing up and down in the flames. The body of the sword seemed to be carved out of ice crystals and crimson crystals. It flowed with red and blue brilliance. The fluctuations of two completely different attributes spread out, shocking everyone. It's so beautiful. Gongsun Xiaoye was stunned. The group of blacksmiths was also dumbfounded. Duan Muyu's expression froze. Even he had to admit that the sword was indeed a work of art that excelled nature. Moreover, the faint fluctuations felt that it was not weaker than his thin saber. It's really beautiful. Even a girl like Yan Wushuang could not help but look a little dazed when she saw the long sword. Yan Xiaotang was like a mute. His face was ashen. This sword shall be named Vermilion Bird Ni Huang, Yi Guqin said calmly. As time passed, his blacksmithing skills became more and more sophisticated. In the future, when he forged a famous sword that belonged to him, he would not be at a loss. What's the use of just looking good? It's just for show, Duan Muyu said with a hint of jealousy. He was not willing to admit that a blacksmith from a small dynasty like Yi Guqin could compare to him. Yi Guqin's lips curled up into a cold smile. Vermilion Bird Ni Huang, go. Yi Guqin poured his true qi into the Vermilion Bird Ni Huang, and the sword hummed. Then, it turned into a red and blue stream of light and rushed toward Duan Muyu. Caught off guard, Duan Muyu subconsciously controlled the thin saber that he had forged and collided with the Vermilion Bird Ni Huang. Clang! An extremely crisp sound of metal clashing resounded throughout the entire divine weapon pavilion. Under everyone's gaze, the thin saber was directly sent flying by the Vermilion Bird Ni Huang. Although the thin saber did not shatter, if one looked closely, one could see that there was a gap on the blade. This. Duan Muyu's expression froze, and his face was extremely ugly. It was as if he had been skinned in public. He had just said that the sword that Yi Guqin had forged was flashy but not practical. In the next moment, the thin saber that he had forged himself was sent flying by the Vermilion Bird Ni Huang. Many blacksmiths around did not dare to say anything because of Duan Muyu's background. However, that vague playful gaze made Duan Muyu's face turn red and extremely embarrassed. For a moment, everyone from the Duanmu family was extremely embarrassed and wanted to find a hole to hide in. Chapter 666. At this stage, there was no need to judge who had won or lost. The result was already clear. Duan Muyu was completely defeated. How could this be? The people of the Duanmu family murmured in disbelief. Duanmuyu, one of the geniuses of their clan who had been fortunate enough to receive some guidance from the Beiyan weapon sovereign, had actually lost to an unknown genius from a low-level dynasty. Yi Guqin was indeed well known in the Saint Origin dynasty, but he had no reputation in other dynasties. What was even more unacceptable to the people of the Duanmu family was that Yi Guqin was not a genius of forging. He was a sword cultivator. Who would dare to believe this? Green, white, and red alternately flashed on Duanmuyu's face as the veins on his temples throbbed. Yi Guqin, who is your master? Duanmuyu gritted his teeth. He did not want to believe that an unknown person could defeat him. A person who possessed such a flame, forging skills, and the secret spirit ascension technique could not be unknown. No master. Yi Guqin said casually. It was better not to reveal the old drunkard's matter. After all, he seemed to have an enemy. Humph. Duanmuyu's face became more and more ugly. On the Gongsun family's side, Gongsun Xiaoye cheered loudly and almost clung to Yi Guqin like an octopus. The onlookers also sighed as they did not expect Yi Guqin to win. Yan Xiaotang completely shut his mouth. He did not even have the chance to mock Yi Guqin's performance. Instead, he felt that his face was swollen. Humph, consider yourself lucky. Duanmuyu flung his sleeves and wanted to leave with the people of the Duanmu family. Wait, aren't you forgetting something? Yi Guqin asked calmly. Duanmuyu stopped in his tracks and took a deep breath. He wanted to leave immediately, but he did not expect Yi Guqin to be so tactless as to point it out. Many people in the surroundings also looked at Duanmuyu with strange expressions. Earlier, the two of them had bet on who would win and who would lose. At the same time, he admitted that the Duanmu family was inferior to the Gongsun family in terms of blacksmithing. However, it would appear that Duanmuyu wanted to leave directly. If that was the case, then the Duanmu family would have lost all face. Are you sure you want me to fulfill my promise? The corners of Duanmuyu's eyes twitched. What do you think? Yi Guqin looked indifferent. Even if it means offending the Duanmu family and the Sky Star dynasty. Duanmuyu's eyes flashed with a cold light. The atmosphere in the hall seemed a little cold and solemn. Yan Xiaotang's eyelids twitched. He stepped forward and said, Brother Yi, why don't we do this? Let's both take a step back and we'll be at peace. He was worried that Yi Guqin would offend the Duanmu family and the Heavenly Star dynasty, which would bring them trouble. Get out of the way. There's no room for you to speak here. Yi Guqin rebuked coldly, not giving Yan Xiaotang any face. You. Yan Xiaotang's throat seemed to be blocked as he stepped back resentfully. Seeing that Yi Guqin was determined to make him fulfill his promise, Duanmuyu was extremely embarrassed. Yi Guqin, the Duanmu family's things aren't that easy to take. Think carefully, Duanmuyu said. You're not as good as me, so you're trying to show off your background. Unfortunately, I don't care. Yi Guqin flung his sleeves. His aura was as sharp as a sword, intimidating everyone. If he was afraid of his background, he wouldn't have attacked Gu Xiaoyang back then. If he was afraid of his background, he wouldn't have interfered in the grudge between Su Jianshi and Di Haoyan. He wasn't even afraid of the Starry Sword Pavilion and the Divine Sword Sect. What was the Duanmu family and the Heavenly Star dynasty to him? Good, you've got guts. Duanmuyu was so angry that he laughed. Yi Guqin had already forced him to this point. If he still refused, it would be too embarrassing for the Duanmu family. With a wave of his hand, Duanmuyu threw out all the treasures in his treasury. At the same time, he gritted his teeth and said coldly, My Duanmu family is inferior to the Gongsun family in terms of forging. After saying that, Duanmuyu didn't want to stay any longer. He walked out of the Divine Weapon Pavilion with an ashen face. Seeing the Duanmu family walk out in a sorry state, all the spectators in the Divine Weapon Pavilion sighed. However, they also looked at Yi Guqin with pity. I heard that the Duanmu family and the Heavenly Star dynasty are tied together. Yeah, Sword Sekti offended the Duanmu family, which can be considered as offending the Heavenly Star Dynasty. I heard that the princes of the Heavenly Star Dynasty will also be here for the Prodigy Battlefield qualifiers. That's right, I heard that Xingli, Xing Xian, and the other princes will be here. There's also the most powerful Crown Prince Xinghong. Crown Prince Xinghong of the Heavenly Star Dynasty is as famous as Princess Fengxi of the Fengni Dynasty. Rumor has it that they've both reached the heaven and earth spiritual bridge realm. They're quite famous among the younger generation. Yi Guqin's expression didn't change as he listened to the discussions around him. Counter soldiers with arms, water with an earth weir. If he cowered, then he wouldn't be Yi Guqin. Little friend Yi, I'm afraid this is a bit too big. Gong Sun Yu and the others sighed. They couldn't afford to offend the Heavenly Star Dynasty now. It's fine, Duanmu Yu hates me. It has nothing to do with the Gong Sun family. Yi Guqin waved his hand. Little friend Yi, you deserve these treasures, Gong Sun Xianlong said gratefully. If it weren't for Yi Guqin, the Gong Sun family would have been taken in by the Duanmu family. No need, I only need a small portion. You can use the rest. Yi Guqin's eyes flashed slightly. He casually put a few materials into his bag, including the 9-orifice divine stone. This. Gong Sun Yu and Gong Sun Xianlong were a bit embarrassed. Yi Guqin seemed to have helped the Gong Sun family too much. Young Master Yi, you saved the Gong Sun family again. Xiaoye is still yours. Gong Sun Xiaoye's crisp voice resounded in the Divine Weapon Pavilion. The surrounding people were speechless. The Gong Sun family's little chili pepper was indeed worthy of her reputation. Yi Guqin could not help but laugh. However, he felt as if there was a resentful gaze on him. He turned his head slightly. Su Jianxue crossed her arms in front of her chest, pouted her lips, and puffed up her cheeks. Her beautiful eyes revealed an innocent, pitiful, and resentful expression. She looked indescribably cute, like a puppy that had been left out. Yi Guqin was a bit speechless. He really didn't want to get involved in this. On second thought, Yi Guqin casually tossed the vermilion bird Ni Huang to Su Jianxue. This. Su Jianxue was stunned. It's for you, Yi Guqin said with a faint smile. The human emperor's sword in Su Jianxue's heart couldn't be used easily. Her previous sword was also a little low grade. Although the vermilion bird Ni Huang hadn't been fused with spiritual runes, it was still a rare weapon. It was perfect for Su Jianxue to use. Are you really giving it to me? Su Jianxue's resentful expression was replaced with a sweet smile. Of course. Yi Guqin nodded. Great. Jianxue felt as if she was drinking honey. Yan Wushuang's eyes dimmed when she saw this scene. Her exquisite face was filled with disappointment. Gong Sun Xiaoye also pouted, complaining that Yi Guqin was biased. But all in all, Yi Guqin had gained a lot this time. Putting everything else aside, just the 9 orifices divine stone alone was more than enough to surpass everything else. Chapter 667. The storm in the Divine Weapon Pavilion had finally come to an end. The news of Yi Guqin defeating Duanmu Yu and forging also began to spread in the imperial capital. For the first time, the name Yi Guqin entered the vision of the various dynasties' skyprides. However, most of the skyprides only treated it as an interesting story. After all, it was only a forging competition and not a martial arts competition. These skyprides came to the Saint Origin dynasty to participate in the preliminaries of the skyprides battlefield. What they cared about were the skyprides with unparalleled combat strength, not the skyprides in forging. In the depths of an extremely luxurious building in the imperial capital. In a warm and fragrant boudoir. A beautiful lady in a golden dress knelt in front of a red muslin curtain. The lady's skin was white and her features were alluring. She was exceptionally beautiful. What was even more surprising was that her cultivation had reached the grand profound martial realm. She was comparable to the skyprides of those high-ranked dynasties. However, such a talented lady was kneeling in front of the red muslin bed as if she was a maid. Inside the red muslin curtain, a blurry figure in red could be vaguely seen. Her hair was loose and her skin was glowing. Her legs were white and slender as she lazily crossed them. Under the cover of the red muslin curtain, she was exceptionally seductive. "Chu Huang, how's the investigation going?" A lazy and charming voice sounded from the tent. From the voice, one could tell that it was an alluring woman. "Your Highness, the investigation is almost complete." Yan Chang'e was stranded in the Saint Origin dynasty and became the master of the Sword Sex Pagoda Forest. His daughter is called Yan Wushuang. "She has also come to the imperial capital," the maid named Chu Huang said respectfully. "Oh, she's come to the imperial capital?" The charming voice carried a hint of playfulness. "She didn't come alone. Ye Guqin is with her. He seems to be from some sword sect. However, his cultivation is only at the 9th transformation divine soul realm, so it's not important. Recently, he defeated Duanmu Yu from the Duanmu family in forging and gained some fame," Chu Huang said. "That Yan Wushuang wouldn't have taken a fancy to this Ye Guqin, right? If that's the case." Within the tent, the young girl's charming laughter was incomparably moving. "Back then, her mother took Yan Chang'e away from my mother. Now, I'm going to take everything from her. Ye Guqin might be a good toy. I hope he can last a little longer in my hands." A soft and charming voice sounded. The beautiful woman in the sand tent stuck out her pink tongue and licked her soft red lips. A bewitching light bloomed from her beautiful eyes. After the incident at the Divine Weapon Pavilion, Ye Guqin and the rest temporarily stayed in the inn, silently waiting for the auction to begin. During this period of time, Ye Guqin had also been studying the 9 Orifices Divine Stone. He discovered that this divine stone was indeed constantly absorbing the heaven and earth spiritual qi in the space. If I can place the 9 Orifices Divine Stone in a place with abundant spiritual qi, it might undergo a transformation and become more spiritual. The famed sword forged in the future will definitely be extremely spiritual, Ye Guqin muttered to himself. However, Ye Guqin still hadn't taken back the innate sword embryo from Gu Xiaoyang, so it was only a temporary thought. If he wanted to forge a famed sword that belonged to him, the innate sword embryo was the best core. This was because the innate sword embryo was originally one with him and existed in his dantian. With the innate sword embryo as the core, only Ye Guqin would be able to unleash the full power of the famed sword forged. A knock sounded out and the door opened, revealing Yan Wushuang's figure. "What's the matter?" Ye Guqin raised his brows. "The auction is about to begin," Yan Wushuang said. "Oh, then let's go," Ye Guqin said. "The standards of the dynasty's auction this time around are not low. The ores that you want and the 5 elemental formation will not be cheap either. However, I will definitely think of a way to help you obtain them." Yan Wushuang bit her lips and said, "Thank you." Ye Guqin smiled. Yan Wushuang also smiled faintly. She didn't ask for anything to happen between her and Ye Guqin. As long as she could help Ye Guqin a little, it would be enough. It was also because of this that she held back her impatience and allowed Yan Xiaotang and the others to come along. "When the time comes, even if I have to lower my face, I'll ask Yan Xiaotang to help me bid for what Ye Guqin needs." Yan Wushuang clenched her fists and swore to herself. Ye Guqin naturally didn't know what Yan Wushuang was thinking. If he knew, he would probably laugh. Not to mention one Yan Xiaotang, even 10 of them combined wouldn't be as rich as Ye Guqin. This was because Ye Guqin didn't only have sky crystals. He also had all sorts of quasi-sage pills, quasi-sage herbs, and rare materials. The most precious thing was the Enlightenment Ancient Tree. A few leaves and branches could be exchanged for countless sky crystals. Therefore, Ye Guqin didn't feel any pressure for this auction. After that, everyone gathered together. Ye Guqin, Su Jianshi, Shui, Yan Wushuang, Ji Ling, Chu Qingqi, Yi Xia, Yan Xiaotang, Yan Feiling, and the others all headed to the Four Directions Tower where the auction would be held. Along the way, Yan Xiaotang puffed out his chest and straightened his back. His previous dejection was swept away, and his face was full of high spirits. This was because it was finally time for him to show off. Yan Xiaotang believed that as long as he could bid for what Yan Wushuang needed at the auction, he would definitely be favored by her. As for Yi Guqin, Yan Xiaotang admitted that in terms of strength and forging, he had been slapped in the face by Yi Guqin. However, in terms of wealth, Yan Xiaotang definitely wouldn't admit defeat. How much wealth could a prodigy from a low-rank dynasty have? Could he be compared to a prince from a high-rank dynasty? Not to mention that other than 100,000 sky crystals, Yan Xiaotang also had many treasures, quasi-saint medicines, and so on. If he sold them at a discount, he would be able to get a lot of sky crystals. Therefore, Yan Xiaotang was confident that he could completely suppress Yi Guqin in terms of wealth. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but smile faintly. "Cousin, if there's anything you want later, just say it. Brother Yi, if you have any needs, I can help you if you beg me." Yan Xiaotang smiled with a hint of complacency. "There's no need for that." Yi Guqin replied casually. He couldn't be bothered to talk to Yan Xiaotang. "You're still trying to be brave at this time. You're really hopeless." Yan Xiaotang shook his head. Soon, they arrived at the Four Directions Tower. The Four Directions Tower was a huge golden palace in the imperial capital. At first glance, it looked like a small city. The interior was spacious enough to accommodate tens of thousands of people. The auction was held in the Golden Palace. What a majestic building! Chu Qingqi, Yi Xia, and the others were amazed. Yi Guqin glanced around and saw countless figures gathered outside the Four Directions Tower. Many of them didn't look like they were from the Saint Origin dynasty. Obviously, they were from other dynasties. Yi Guqin and the others walked straight to the Four Directions Tower, but they were stopped by a few people who looked like guards. "What's the matter?" Yi Guqin asked. "What's your name? Which dynasty are you from?" one of the guards asked indifferently. "Yi Guqin, Saint Origin dynasty," Yi Guqin said. The guard's expression didn't change at all. Obviously, he wasn't from the Saint Origin dynasty. As long as he was from the Saint Origin dynasty, most of them would be surprised and respectful when they heard the name Yi Guqin. "I'm sorry, if you're from a low-rank dynasty, you have to pay 100,000 crystal jades per person," the guard said coldly. 100,000? So expensive? Chu Qingqi and the others were speechless. It wasn't that they couldn't afford 100,000 crystal jades. However, the entry fee was already 100,000 crystal jades. It was a bit of a rip-off. Suddenly, a commotion broke out in the crowd. A young man in a brocade robe walked in with his hands behind his back. Behind him was an old man. It was the young prince of the Great Yu dynasty, Yu Wenji, who had a conflict with Yi Guqin in the sword battle dojo. Enemies are bound to meet on a narrow road. Yu Wenji's lips curled into a playful smile as he glanced at Yi Guqin. Yi Guqin's expression didn't change at all. "Do I still need to announce my name?" Yu Wenji asked the guards. "Of course not. Who doesn't know the young prince of the Great Yu dynasty? Please enter." The guards nodded and bowed, revealing flattering smiles. "Heh. Here's your reward." Yu Wenji casually threw out 5,000 heaven crystals. That was equivalent to 500,000 crystal jades. But to Yu Wenji, it was nothing more than a tip. "Thank you, little prince." The group of guards were even more delighted. Yu Wenji's lips curled up as he glanced at Yi Guqin and said, "It's important to know one's place. If you don't have enough wealth, don't come to the dynasty's auction." Then, Yu Wenji retracted his gaze and walked into the square tower with a hint of pride. "Don't they have to pay a fee?" Yi Guqin didn't mind and asked. One of the guards glanced at Yi Guqin and said, "Guests from intermediate dynasties and above don't have to pay a fee. But there aren't many prodigies from lower dynasties. They have to pay an entrance fee to prevent others from passing them off. You're all looking down on me." Su Jianshi gritted her teeth. She was a girl with a strong sense of justice and couldn't stand such a snobbish scene. "I'm Yan Xiaotang from the Swallow Cloud dynasty. Can I bring them in?" Yan Xiaotang straightened his back and asked. Of course. One of the guards hesitated for a moment before nodding. They couldn't afford to offend a prodigy from a high-tier dynasty. But these guards were secretly looking down on Yi Guqin. They probably thought that Yi Guqin was Yan Xiaotang's lackey. No need. We have plenty of crystal jades. Su Jianshi threw out a pile of crystal jades angrily. Yi Guqin gave all the crystal jades he had obtained from the sword battle dojo to Su Jianshi. Is this enough? Su Jianshi asked angrily. Yes, it's enough. The guards nodded. Why do you have to do this? You don't have much crystal jades to begin with. Why waste them here? Yan Xiaotang sighed and shook his head. Let's go. Yi Guqin didn't mind and waved his hand. This kind of game of comparing one's net worth was really boring. Chapter 668. The interior of the building was extremely spacious with richly ornamented pillars and golden jade arches. It was extremely luxurious. The dynasty auction was a top-tier auction that gathered the prodigies of more than 10 dynasties. Generally speaking, there weren't many auctions of this scale in the Saint Origin dynasty. If it wasn't for the prodigy battlefield's preliminaries being held in the Forbidden Violet Mountain, the prodigies of the other dynasties wouldn't even bother to come to the Saint Origin dynasty. As soon as Yi Guqin entered, he saw that there were many different seats. They were clearly divided. Most of them were ordinary seats that were located at the back of the stage. The VIP seats were located at the front and surrounded the stage. They were also the closest seats to the stage. Above that, there were also top-notch private rooms on the second floor. From there, one could look down on the stage from above. Of course, ordinary prodigies weren't qualified to occupy such rooms. Even Yu Wenji from the Great Yu dynasty was only seated at the front of the VIP seats. In addition, Vermilion Bird dynasty's Ke Ling, Xianming dynasty's Ku Mo, and the others were also seated at the VIP seats. Only the prodigies of the lower dynasties weren't qualified to sit at the VIP seats. Cousin, let's go to the VIP seats, Yan Xiaotang said gently. Yan Wushuang looked at Yi Guqin with a questioning gaze. This place is pretty good. Yi Guqin sat at the ordinary seats with an indifferent expression. Yan Wushuang didn't say anything as she sat beside him. Su Jianshi, Shui, and the others sat on the other side of Yi Guqin. Yan Xiaotang's face twitched slightly as he sighed, forget it. I'll also sit at the ordinary seats with you guys. We can obviously sit at the VIP seats, Yan Feiling mumbled. She felt that sitting at the ordinary seats wasn't befitting of her status as the princess of a high-tier dynasty. At this moment, Yu Wenji, who was seated at the VIP seats, also cast a faint gaze over. At least he knows his place. Yu Wenji shook his head and sneered. Yi Guqin was the one who didn't know his place by choosing to sit at the VIP seats. As time passed, the geniuses from the various empires arrived one after another. Among them, some of the more well-known geniuses even caused waves of exclamations. That's Prince Yang Yi of the Golden Sun dynasty, an expert of the Great Profound Gate. His fierce son Divine Palm is incomparably tyrannical, and he once fought against 3 Great Profound Gates alone without falling into a disadvantage. A young man in a luxurious golden robe entered the field. His eyes were like the scorching sun, releasing divine radiance that made people raise their eyebrows. That gloomy man must be Guo Qiluo, the godson of the Black Voodoo cult of the Black Voodoo dynasty. I've heard that he specializes in cultivating the divine soul, and his methods are extremely strange. Everyone's gaze once again converged on a black-robed man. He wore a pitch-black mask, and his eyes were completely black. He looked somewhat chilling. The arrival of each genius would cause an uproar. In comparison, Yi Guqin, the sword grandmaster of the Saint Origin dynasty, was somewhat unknown. In addition, he was sitting in the ordinary seats, so no one paid any attention to him. Brother Yi, do you see that? Don't limit your vision to this small Saint Origin dynasty. Only when you look outside the dynasty will you know how big the sky is and how small you are. Yan Xiaotang timely said. He just couldn't stand Yan Wushuang's respectful look towards Yiguchen. Yiguchen's name as the Sword Grandmaster might be well known in the Saint Origin dynasty. But in the outside world, how many people knew about it? Yiguchen's expression was calm. Reputation was like floating clouds to him. As for vision, sorry, Yiguchen dared to attack Gu Xiaoyang, one of the top 10 young masters of the South Horizon region, when he was only in the Qi refinement realm. Dare I ask, how do these geniuses compare to young master Xingyun Gu Xiaoyang? Not to mention that Yiguchen would have to face Di Haotian after this. In front of that kind of existence, these geniuses were just ants. Therefore, Yan Xiaotang said that Yiguchen's vision was narrow, which was really ridiculous. Of course, Yiguchen didn't have the intention to argue with Yan Xiaotang. But Yan Wushuang said solemnly, I believe that after this prodigy battlefield qualifier, Yiguchen will be famous in all the dynasties. Divine Soul 9 transformations, famous in all the dynasties. Ha! Yan Xiaotang shook his head, thinking that this joke was very funny. But he chose to forget the fact that he was defeated by Yiguchen. Yiguchen ignored him. This time, he only wanted to see if he could obtain the 5 elements sword formation and the chaos origin crystal. If he could really get it, then Yiguchen's confidence would be even greater. At this time, another group of people entered the square tower. The leader was a handsome young man. It was Duanmu Yu from the Duanmu family. Duanmu Yu from the Star Dynasty is here too. He is a blacksmith. Of course, he won't miss this auction. But I heard that he had a forging competition with a native genius of the Saint Origin dynasty and lost. It's really embarrassing. Hearing the faint discussion around him, Duanmu Yu's face stiffened. He glanced around and suddenly fixed his eyes on Yiguchen. Coldness burst out in his eyes. Are you qualified to participate in the dynasty auction? Duanmu Yu said coldly. Yiguchen ignored him. Duanmu Yu's face became more and more ugly. He flung his sleeve and said, You won't get anything in this auction. After saying that, Duanmu Yu and his group walked forward. But unexpectedly, he did not go to the VIP seats. Instead, he went to a top private room on the second floor. Who booked that private room? Yiguchen raised his eyebrows slightly. Who else? Of course, it's the people from the Star Dynasty. I already told you not to provoke Duanmu Yu. Provoking him is provoking the Star Dynasty. Yan Xiaotang said angrily. The Star Dynasty. Yiguchen narrowed his eyes slightly. He still did not understand the relationship between the Star Dynasty and the Starry Sword Pavilion. However, if the Star Dynasty also provoked him, Yiguchen would not be merciful. Time passed, and most of the geniuses from more than 10 dynasties had arrived. An old man with white hair and a beard walked up the auction platform and cupped his hands to everyone. I'm indebted to everyone for allowing me to preside over this auction. Let's cut to the chase and serve some appetizers first. The old man clapped his hands, and a servant girl came forward with a tray. There was a jade slip on the tray. This is a Middle King martial art, the 7 unique Sky Moon martial arts. The starting price is 20,000 heaven crystals, the old man said loudly. 20,000 heaven crystals was equivalent to 2 million crystal jades. It was not a small amount. Yiguchen was slightly speechless. A Middle King martial art was considered a core martial art in the 7 major forces. However, it was only an appetizer in the dynasty auction. Of course, Yiguchen did not have the intention to bid. Yuwenji and the other geniuses from the advanced dynasties did not even look at it. Obviously, they did not care about it at all. Only the geniuses from the intermediate dynasties bid. In the end, the king martial art was won by someone for 30,000 heaven crystals. Then, a few more auction items were brought up. Without exception, most of them were bought by people in the ordinary seats. As for the geniuses in the VIP seats and the top private rooms, they were too lazy to bid. After that, another auction item appeared. When Yiguchen saw this, his indifferent expression changed slightly. He was a little interested in it. Chapter 669. This auction item was a silver crystal. What was even more bizarre was that this crystal was actually able to float in the air on its own, causing people to click their tongues in wonder. Magnetic crystal. Yi Guchen recognized it at a glance. The magnetic crystal was a top-grade material. If it was integrated into a divine weapon, it would make it easier to control. It was a good supplementary material. I'm sure everyone knows about the magnetic crystal. It's very useful to blacksmiths. I won't say much about it. The starting price is 30,000 heaven crystals, said the old man who was hosting the auction. Many people hesitated when they heard the starting price. The value of this item would be greater in the hands of blacksmiths. Therefore, the magnetic crystal was not as popular as the previous auction items. At this moment, Yi Guchen bid 30,000 heaven crystals. Yi Guchen's bid attracted some people's attention. That young man seems to be Yi Guchen from the Sword Sect. He's quite famous in the Saint Origin dynasty. I think he defeated Duan Muyu in blacksmithing before. It's understandable that he wants the magnetic crystal. Everyone was talking about it. 30,000 heaven crystals was equivalent to 3 million crystal jades. It was not a low price. Yan Wushuang was slightly worried. In her eyes, Yi Guchen's foundation was only the 5 million crystal jades that he won from the sword battle dojo. Now, he had spent more than half of it. This little brother has bid 30,000 heaven crystals. Is there anyone who wants to bid higher? Shouted the old man. Everyone was silent. The magnetic crystal jades were not attractive to most people. 30,000 heaven crystals going once, 30,000 heaven crystals going twice. Just when the old man was about to drop the hammer, Yuwenji's eyes flashed and he was about to bid. However, Duan Muyu's voice came from the private room on the second floor. 35,000. As soon as his voice fell, many people looked at Yi Guchen with playful eyes. Oh, interesting. This Yi Guchen is really a troublemaker. Looks like I don't need to do anything, Yuwenji sneered. The matter between Yi Guchen and Duan Muyu had spread throughout the imperial city. Most people knew about the enmity between them. At this moment, hearing Duan Muyu's words, Yi Guchen must be feeling extremely uncomfortable. Duan Muyu's wealth as a blacksmith went without saying. It should be known that he had the even more terrifying Starry Sky dynasty by his side. Presumably, a prodigy of the Star dynasty was also in that box. With Duan Muyu and the geniuses of the Heavenly Star dynasty present, it would be difficult for Yi Guchen to gain anything from this auction. At the thought of this, everyone could not help but cast sympathetic gazes at Yi Guchen. That Duan Muyu is too detestable. Ji Ling and the other inner court disciples were all furious. If you don't listen to the advice of a good man, you'll be at a disadvantage. Yan Xiaotang seemed to be uninvolved in the matter as he watched coldly from the sidelines. He had long advised Yi Guchen not to provoke Duan Muyu. Now, he had finally tasted the bitter fruit. Yan Xiaotang glanced at Yi Guchen, thinking that Yi Guchen would fly into a rage out of humiliation. But to his surprise, Yi Guchen's eyes were as calm as an ancient well. There was no change in his expression at all. Still pretending. Yan Xiaotang secretly shook his head. 40,000 heaven crystals, Yi Guchen said. His words caused an uproar. A prodigy of a low-level dynasty actually dared to compete with a blacksmith prodigy of a top-level dynasty in terms of wealth. It seems that Yi Guchen's brain has been flooded with water. Some people shook their heads. 50,000 heaven crystals. Duan Muyu's faint voice came from the box on the second floor. Yi Guchen's eyes flashed, and he did not speak again. Although the magnetic crystal was not bad, it was not to the extent that it was necessary. Moreover, the 9-orifice divine stone that Yi Guchen obtained from Duan Muyu was many times more precious than the magnetic crystal. Seeing that Yi Guchen had given up, everyone took it for granted. Only Yan Wushuang and the others felt a little aggrieved. Ha! Duan Muyu's faint mocking laughter came from the box. But what happened next was that Yiguchen would bid for any auction item that was put up for auction. As a result, Duanmuyu also bid for a lot of things that he did not need in a fit of pique. Such a situation caused everyone's expressions to be extremely interesting to watch. Yiguchen has completely offended Duanmuyu this time. Many people shook their heads and clicked their tongues. Yiguchen, you've got guts. In the box, Duanmuyu's voice contained a trace of anger. A young man sat leisurely by his side. He wore a starry robe that was dazzling, and he had a spirited appearance. He was the Sky Star Dynasty's Prince Xingli. In his hand, he was playing with a pitch-black sword token. If Yiguchen was here, he would definitely be surprised. Because this sword token was the ancient sword token. And beside Prince Xingli, there was a young man in a golden robe with a trace of flattery on his face, standing respectfully like a servant. Yiguchen was also very familiar with this person. It was Prince Yuanyi. A dignified prince of a country was standing beside Prince Xingli like a servant at this moment. That guy called Yiguchen is a little interesting, Prince Xingli said with a smile. He's just an ant. Duanmuyu's face was still a little pale. Obviously, he was quite angry with Yiguchen's methods. That Yiguchen has always been like this. He's arrogant and doesn't know how to respect his seniors, Prince Yuanyi echoed with a bone-deep hatred in his eyes. He and Yiguchen had a life-and-death feud. Prince Xingli's eyes revealed a playful look. This ancient sword token, you said that in addition to your royal family having two, the Murong family has one, and Yiguchen has one, right? Yes, it's absolutely true, Prince Yuanyi said. Very good. Prince Xingli's eyes flickered secretly. No one knew what he was thinking. At this moment, Yiguchen obviously didn't know what was going on in the private room on the second floor. But his methods made Duanmuyu not dare to casually bid with him again, for fear that he would be cheated again. As time passed, the level of the auction items that were brought out became higher and higher, and the starting price became more and more expensive. In the end, most of the ordinary seats didn't have the ability to participate in the bidding. The next auction item, I'm sure all the prides present will like it very much. The old man smiled mysteriously. A maid carried a tray onto the stage. On the tray was a jade bottle. What kind of elixir is this? Many people looked puzzled. This jade bottle contains a heavenly youthful elixir. Although it's only a sage-to-be elixir, its rarity and special effects are not inferior to a sage-to-be elixir. The effect of this elixir is to make one's face radiant and youthful, cleanse one's muscles and bones, and mold one's body to be flawless, the old man said. Most of the prides present were stunned. Only the proud daughters of the heavens had bright eyes after hearing this. Their eyes were filled with a fanaticism that the male martial artists found inconceivable, even girls like Yan Wushuang and Su Jianshi were no exception. Although they didn't show it, their eyes were faintly glowing. One could imagine that if someone could bid for the heavenly youthful elixir and give it to the girl they liked, that girl would be incomparably touched. Yan Xiaotang was itching to make a move. If he could bid for the heavenly youthful elixir and give it to Yan Wushuang would probably change her opinion of him. Yiguchen caught a glimpse of Su Jianqi's longing expression from the corner of his eye. This girl wants it too. Yiguchen smiled faintly. Chapter 670. If Su Jianqi wanted it, Yiguchen would find a way to get it even if it was the 9 heavenly stars. No matter how good he was to Su Jianqi, he would never go overboard. The old man on the stage spoke. The starting price of the youthful beauty pill was 40,000 heaven crystals. It was equivalent to 4 million crystal jades. That was only a quasi-sage pill. Even if it was worth a lot, it definitely wouldn't reach that level. Clearly, the youthful beauty pill's special effect was what made its price soar. Almost no one in the ordinary seats spoke. At this point in the auction, there was no room for them to interfere. Those who were truly qualified to bid were the VIP seats and the prodigies in the private rooms on the second floor. 50,000 heaven crystals. A resolute and decisive voice sounded. Everyone was bewildered because the source of the voice was actually from the ordinary seats. However, when they saw who it was, they weren't surprised. The bidder was Yan Xiaotang. So it's the crown prince of the Swallow Cloud dynasty. Why is he sitting in the ordinary seats? Some people had a strange expression. Yan Wushuang hesitated for a moment before saying, "There's no need." She wanted Yan Xiaotang to leave the heaven crystals behind to help Yiguchen bid for what he needed. How could she waste it on the youthful beauty pill? Although Yan Wushuang also wanted it. After all, she was a girl. How could she not want to be youthful forever? However, in order to help Yiguchen, she had no regrets. "It's fine, cousin. Let's see how I'll get the youthful beauty pill for you." Yan Xiaotang was full of confidence. Then, some prodigies from high-tier dynasties also bid. After all, even if they didn't need it, it was good to give it to someone else. The atmosphere in the auction was heated. Su Jianshi obediently sat beside Yiguchen without saying a word. She was very sensible. Although she wanted it, she wouldn't ask for it. Yiguchen saw Su Jianshi's expression and smiled faintly without saying anything. Soon, the price of the youthful beauty pill rose to a shocking 80,000 heaven crystals. That was 8 million crystal jades. It was shocking. This was definitely a sky-high price. Not to mention the ordinary seats, even the sky prides in the VIP seats were starting to frown. Some of them had already left. 90,000 sky crystals. Yan Xiaotang's expression sunk slightly as he clenched his teeth and said. Xiao Chen's bottom line was not just 100,000 heaven crystals. This was because he still had other valuable treasures. However, Yan Xiaotang wasn't willing to casually sell that kind of thing. At this moment, a woman's voice sounded from another room on the second floor. 120,000 heaven crystals. Once these words were spoken, the entire square tower fell silent. It increased by 30,000 heaven crystals all of a sudden. He was truly rich and overbearing. Yan Xiaotang's face twitched slightly. However, when he looked towards the private room, his expression suddenly changed. A fear that he had never felt before flowed out from his eyes. One had to know that Yan Xiaotang had always been arrogant and haughty. To be able to make him reveal such an expression, it was obvious that he was extremely fearful. "What's wrong, brother Xiaotang?" Yan Feiling asked. "I'm afraid that the person in that private room is from the Fengni dynasty," Yan Xiaotang said in a deep voice. Once these words were spoken, Yan Wushuang, who had been sitting calmly, immediately straightened her delicate body. Her expression changed, and an uncontrollable hatred vaguely appeared in her eyes. The current empress of the Fengni dynasty had forced her birth mother to death. This kind of hatred could not be resolved. The Fengni dynasty? Yiguchen looked towards the private room. Yan Changge had specially instructed him to take care of Yan Wushuang if possible. This was because he might encounter someone from the Fengni dynasty. He didn't expect to actually encounter them. Seeing that someone from the Fengni dynasty had made a bid, the entire square tower fell silent. The Fengni dynasty was a top-tier dynasty with a false saint overseeing it. Princess Fengxi was also a rather famous 7th-grade sky pride. She possessed the immortal phoenix blood. Many people expected that Princess Fengxi would probably amaze everyone in this prodigy battlefield qualifier and obtain the qualifications to become the champion. Therefore, no one present dared to offend the Fengni dynasty. The auctioneer looked around. Just as he was about to bring down his hammer, an indifferent voice was suddenly emitted. 150,000 heaven crystals. Hearing this voice, everyone was stunned and puzzled. Someone actually dared to offend the Fengni dynasty? Which high-tier dynasty's sky pride was it? Then, everyone's gaze turned towards the source of the voice. But when they saw the person who had spoken, their faces froze. This was because the person who had spoken wasn't a sky pride from a high-tier dynasty. It was Yiguchen. What? Am I seeing things? That looks like Yiguchen. Is that the native sky pride from the Saint Origin dynasty? He's starting to act up after defeating Duanmuyu in forging. Yiguchen's bid caused an uproar. Putting aside whether Yiguchen could take out so many heaven crystals for the time being, just offending the Fengni dynasty was a very foolish thing to do. Ha! He's digging his own grave. Yu Wenji sneered inwardly. He had never seen such a stupid person who couldn't even recognize his own identity. Shut up. How can you offend the Fengni dynasty? Yan Xiaotong's face changed drastically. Didn't he see how fearful he was of the Fengni dynasty? What right did Yiguchen have to speak? Did he even have so many heaven crystals? You've screwed us over. Yan Feiling's face also turned ugly. The Fengni dynasty and the Swallow Cloud dynasty weren't on good terms to begin with. Yan Wushuang's eyes were filled with disappointment. Were Yan Xiaotang, Yan Feiling, and the others that afraid of the Fengni dynasty? In comparison, Yiguchen didn't cower in the slightest. Because of Yiguchen's bid, it caused an uproar in the hall. In the next moment, the door to the private room on the second floor was suddenly pushed open. A beautiful girl in golden clothes walked out with a cold expression on her face. Who dares to bid? The girl's gaze swept across the hall and landed on Yiguchen's group. Seeing the girl walk out, an uproar broke out in the four-square tower. What a beautiful girl! Is that Princess Fengxi of the Fengni dynasty? But why is her strength at the Grand Profound Gate? Isn't she at the spiritual bridge of heaven and earth? What do you know? That girl is Princess Fengxi's personal maid. I think her name is Chu Huang. What? She's just a maid, but she's comparable to a prodigy. Everyone around him was stunned. This girl named Chu Huang was comparable to a prodigy of a high-tier dynasty. But in the end, she was only Princess Fengxi's maid. As expected of a top-tier dynasty. Many people sighed. At the same time, they looked at Yiguchen's group with sympathy. It was foolish of them to provoke the Fengni dynasty. Yan Xiaotang and Yan Feiling's faces turned pale when they saw Chu Huang's gaze. Yan Wushuang clenched her fists tightly, trying her best not to let her hatred explode. Princess Fengxi was the daughter of the person who forced her mother to death. She could be considered her enemy. However, Yiguchen, who was standing beside her, patted her shoulder lightly. It's fine. Let me handle it, said Yiguchen. Chapter 671. Yan Wushuang's heart was filled with hatred. However, Yiguchen's comforting action of patting her shoulder calmed her down. It was as if she could feel at ease as long as Yiguchen was in front of her. She had to admit that it was a good feeling. Yiguchen didn't notice Yan Wushuang's thoughts. Even without Yan Changge's reminder, he wouldn't let Yan Wushuang face the Phoenix dynasty alone. It wasn't that he was giving Yan Wushuang special treatment. If it was Chu Qingqi or Ji Ling, he would do the same. Isn't it true that the highest bidder wins the auction? Facing Chu Huang from the Phoenix Nye dynasty, Yiguchen's expression was calm and composed. Chu Huang narrowed her eyes and said coldly, "You should know that I'm from the Phoenix dynasty. Don't think that you have the backing of the Swallow dynasty." It was obvious that Chu Huang thought that Yiguchen's confidence came from the Swallow dynasty when she saw Yan Xiaotang and the others. "Ha, Miss Chu, this has nothing to do with the Swallow dynasty. Brother Yi was too impulsive." Yan Xiaotang wiped the cold sweat off his forehead. He didn't have the guts to go against Princess Fengxi and the others. If it was the crown prince, Yan Jiuxing, he might have a chance. Yan Wushuang clenched her fists. She was completely disappointed in Yan Xiaotang and the others. "Oh, is that so? Then Yiguchen, I'll give you a chance to back out now," Chu Huang said coldly. Yiguchen chuckled and didn't say anything. He turned to the old man on the stage and said, "Can we bid now?" Sure." The old man hesitated. Although the Phoenix dynasty was powerful, there were more than 10 dynasties gathered here. They still had to abide by the rules. 160,000. Chu Huang gritted her teeth as her gaze turned colder. She wanted to see if Yiguchen, a prodigy from a small dynasty, had the wealth to bid against the Phoenix dynasty. 180,000. Yiguchen didn't even blink. Crazy, this is really crazy. Yan Xiaotang was stunned. 180,000 heaven crystals. Even if it was him, taking out such an amount would cost him a great deal. He might even have to empty out half of his fortune. How could Yiguchen have such wealth? Yan Wushuang's face was also slightly pale. She also did not think that Yiguchen had so many heaven crystals. Chu Huang's chest heaved up and down. She was extremely angered by Yiguchen. Although she was only Princess Phoenix Dawn's personal maid, her status wasn't lower than those prodigies of high-tier dynasties. Hence, she had always been somewhat arrogant. But now, he had been repeatedly provoked by Yiguchen. However, when he thought about the treasures that Princess Phoenix she wanted to bid for, Chu Huang could only temporarily suppress his sullenness. He glared fiercely at Yiguchen and no longer spoke. The old auctioneer said after seeing this. 180,000 going once, twice, 3 times. Deal. No one fought with Yiguchen anymore. Even Chu Huang from the Phoenix Nye dynasty had shut up. However, the gazes of most people still did not change. They were still filled with ridicule. Spending 180,000 heaven crystals to bid for the splendid beauty pill could be considered a waste. Not to mention, many people suspected that Yiguchen couldn't take out 180,000 heaven crystals at all. Young master, after the auction is over, we will immediately settle the transaction. I hope young master understands that if you bid recklessly, the consequences will be very serious. The old auctioneer took a deep look at Yiguchen. Obviously, he was also doubting Yiguchen. After all, low-tier dynasties used crystal jades as their currency. They probably hadn't seen many heaven crystals. It was really suspicious to say that he could take out 180,000 heaven crystals. Yiguchen didn't mind and nodded lightly. Yan Xiaotang and the others didn't speak, but their eyes were also filled with doubt. This could only be considered as an interlude. However, in the eyes of many people, Yiguchen would probably be in trouble after the auction ended. The items that were taken out for auction became more and more precious. Almost everyone in the ordinary seats became spectators. Only the geniuses of high-tier and top-tier dynasties were qualified to compete. Yiguchen was slightly disappointed. Because until now, the item he wanted had yet to appear. The next ore to be auctioned is the Phoenix Blood Stone. It is soaked in a drop of Phoenix blood. A stone that was as red as blood was brought up. Yiguchen took a look and lost interest. If it was the blood of a true phoenix, then it would be a priceless treasure. But it was just a phoenix blood, so its value was much lower. However, it was still a rare treasure. 200,000 heaven crystals. Chu Huang said without hesitation. This was the item that Princess Fengxi wanted to bid for. Seeing that Chu Huang had spoken, the entire place fell silent. Chu Huang raised her chin slightly and revealed a trace of cold arrogance. This was the dignity that the Phoenix Nye dynasty should have. Thinking of this, she couldn't help but glance at Yiguchen, who was sitting calmly. Only an ignorant guy like Yiguchen would dare to provoke her. The auctioneer cleared his throat and said solemnly, "Ladies and gentlemen, there are only a few auction items left, but they are definitely the most precious items collected from various dynasties." As soon as he finished speaking, everyone's eyes were fixed on the stage. A golden jade scroll was presented to him. It looked simple and mysterious. "Ladies and gentlemen, this jade slip records a sword technique martial art," the old man said mysteriously. "Oh, could it be a supreme tier king level sword technique?" Some geniuses guessed. A supreme tier king level sword technique was considered a core sword technique even in a high tier dynasty. The old man shook his head and smiled. "Wrong, the jade slip contains an emperor level sword technique." "What?" As soon as these words came out, everyone was shocked. Even Yuwenji, Yang Yi, Guichi Luo, and the other high-tier dynasty geniuses couldn't help but stand up with a shocked expression. Emperor-level sword techniques were extremely rare and precious. In these dynasties, they were considered the ultimate martial arts of their clans. It was already good to have one. Even among the overlord-level forces, it was rare. Would a martial art of this level be put up for auction? While many people were shocked, they were also full of doubts. Feeling the doubtful gazes, the old man smiled and said, "Ahem, although this sword technique is an emperor-level sword technique, it is incomplete and the moves are incomplete." As soon as these words came out, the whole place was filled with boos. No wonder it was put up for auction. It turned out to be a defective product. Although it was an incomplete emperor-level sword technique, it was far stronger than a king-level sword technique. But compared to a real emperor-level sword technique, it was much weaker. This sword technique is called the Divine Emperor Sword Technique. Although it is incomplete, it is possible to perfect it if you have the talent for sword cultivation, the old man said with a smile. Perfect an emperor-level sword technique? Are you kidding me? Even a venerable can't do that, right? Many geniuses shook their heads. The old man seemed to know that he seemed to have gone overboard and couldn't help but feel a little embarrassed. Yiguchen glanced at it and didn't have much of a reaction. If he didn't have the immortal god's weep, he might still care about the Divine Emperor Sword technique. However, as long as he combined the God Slayer and Immortal Slaying Sword techniques, he would be able to obtain a complete Emperor-level sword technique. Therefore, the Divine Emperor Sword technique was useless to him. Moreover, he had put all his energy into improving his cultivation and didn't have much time to perfect the Divine Emperor Sword technique. However, beside him, Su Jianchu's eyes were faintly shining. Chapter 672. Do you need this Divine Emperor Sword technique? Yiguchen asked. This. Su Jianchu hesitated. She didn't know how many sky crystals Yiguchen had, but she didn't want him to spend money. Just say it, Yiguchen said. Su Jianchu bit her lips and said, "This Divine Emperor Sword technique is very compatible with the Mortal Sovereign Sword. If I can get it, I might be able to use the Mortal Sovereign Sword to perfect the Divine Emperor Sword technique." Perfect the Divine Emperor Sword technique? Yiguchen looked up. Su Jianchu could use the Mortal Sovereign Sword to perfect the Divine Emperor Sword technique. This was something that even supremacies couldn't do. However, when he thought of the mysterious power of the Mortal Sovereign Sword, he understood. After all, it was understandable that she had 1/3 of the power of a primordial sword. The starting price of the Divine Emperor Sword technique was 300,000 sky crystals. It was equivalent to 30 million crystal jades. This was because it was an incomplete version. If it was the complete version, almost no one would put it up for auction. 310,000. 330,000. Some heaven's prides from high-tier dynasties started to bid. Even if they couldn't win, they had to give it a try. 400,000. A cold voice sounded. It was Chu Huang from the Fengni dynasty. Once she spoke, there were fewer people bidding. It was obvious that a top-tier dynasty had a lot of power. However, at this moment, a calm voice came from another box. 450,000. Prince Xingli from the Starry dynasty? Chu Huang's expression changed slightly, but she didn't say anything. Facing Yiguchen, she couldn't be too arrogant. However, the Starry dynasty was also a top-tier dynasty like the Fengni dynasty. They were also related to the Starry Sword Pavilion. The one who spoke was also a prince. Chu Huang was only Princess Fengxi's maid. She didn't have the right to criticize Prince Xingli. Bullying the weak and fearing the strong. Seeing Chu Huang's behavior, Ji Ling and the others snorted. Yiguchen had bid fairly, but this Chu Huang was making irresponsible remarks. In the end, Chu Huang didn't dare to say anything when Prince Xingli bid. However, as Prince Xingli spoke, the atmosphere in the auction heated up again. 500,000. At this moment, another voice came from another private room on the second floor. Who's in that private room? I don't know. There's no news at all. Many people were puzzled. However, to be able to sit in a private room on the second floor and compete with Prince Xingli, Chu Huang, and the others, he must not be an ordinary person. Hearing this voice, Yi Guqin's eyes flashed with a strange light. Interesting. Yi Guqin smiled faintly. Amidst everyone's bidding, the price of the Divine Emperor's sword technique reached 550,000 heaven crystals. It was still the person in the mysterious private room. Humph. Chu Huang's expression did not look too good, but it was difficult for her to continue. Who is the person in the box? There's actually no news at all. Prince Xingli was also somewhat surprised. Just when everyone thought that the Divine Emperor's swordsmanship was going to fall into the hands of the mysterious person in the private room, a voice rang out. A faint voice was heard again. 560,000. Everyone focused their gazes and realized that it was still Yi Guqin. For a moment, everyone was stunned. Since when was a sky pride from a low-level dynasty so rich? Yi Guqin. Yan Wushuang wanted to say something but stopped. She originally wanted to borrow Yan Xiaotang's wealth to help Yi Guqin. But now, Yi Guqin's bid had probably far exceeded Yan Xiaotang's net worth. Yan Xiaotang saw Yan Wushuang's expression and knew that she wanted to help Yi Guqin. He was unhappy and said coldly, "Cousin, it's not that I don't want to help Brother Yi, but Brother Yi is too casual. I can't take out so many heaven crystals." In short, it was very simple. Yan Xiaotang would no longer care about Yi Guqin's affairs. Yan Wushuang's face turned even paler. If Yi Guqin could not take out so many heaven crystals, the consequences would be obvious. Silly boy, why don't we just forget about it? Su Jianshi was also a little nervous. After all, this Divine Emperor's swordsmanship was bought by Yi Guqin for her. It's fine. Yi Guqin did not mind at all. Su Jianshi did not say anything, but her heart was filled with happiness. She and Yi Guqin were both selfless people who would do anything for each other. TSK, he provoked the Phoenix dynasty and now a mysterious person. Yi Guqin is really courting death. Some of the sky prides shook their heads. Yu Wenji, Duan Muyu, and the others were also waiting for Yi Guqin's bid to be lowered. But in the end, a faint voice came from the private room. Since this brother wants it, I won't take it from you. That person actually gave up. This was beyond everyone's expectations. Yu Wenji, Chu Huang, and the others, who wanted to watch a good show, were also stunned. In the end, the Divine Emperor's swordsmanship was successfully bought by Yi Guqin. Sigh, looks like the dynasty auction is about to end. Yi Guqin frowned. Could it be that he didn't have a single thing that he needed? At this moment, the old man on the stage spoke again. The next items are 2 arrays. The first one is the Great Blazing Sun Array, a low-grade Earth-class array, said the old man. It's an Earth-class array. Many people were in an uproar. Earth-class arrays were also extremely rare. Even low-grade arrays were rare. Yi Guqin shook his head inwardly. This array was useless to him. On the other hand, the sky pride of the Golden Sun dynasty, Yang Yi, was determined to win. In the end, the Great Blazing Sun Array was bought by Yang Yi for 350,000 heaven crystals. The next formation is a sword formation. Although its grade is the same as the Great Blazing Sun formation, a low-grade Earth rank formation, if it is supported by the power of the 5 elements, its power will multiply. If it is fully activated, I'm afraid it can barely match a mid-grade Earth rank formation. The old man said as a disc array was presented. This sword array is called the 5 Emperors Cosmos Sword Array. It contains the Gold Emperor, Azure Emperor, Black Emperor, Scarlet Emperor, and Yellow Emperor. They represent the 5 elements of metal, wood, water, fire, and earth. The old man's introduction made many people's eyes light up. Low grade, middle grade, although there was only a difference of 1 grade, the power of the array would be very different. Yi Guqin's eyes were unprecedentedly bright. Finally, the thing that he needed appeared. No matter what price he had to pay, he had to get this 5 Emperor's Cosmos sword array. Because this was simply made for him. If he added the 5 elements sword intent onto the 5 array swords, and then activated the sword array. How powerful would that power be? Just thinking about it made one's heart surge. This sword array also received a lot of attention. But because only the power of the 5 elements could fully unleash its power, many skyprides shook their heads regretfully. Not everyone had the power of the 5 elements. 200,000. Chu Huang shouted. 230,000, Prince Xingli said indifferently. 250,000, the person in the mysterious box said. 270,000, 300,000, as the price rose, the people who followed the price also became fewer and fewer. In the end, the highest price was Prince Xingli's bid, 350,000. Looks like this sword array is Prince Xingli's. Many people sighed. 350,000 going once, 350,000 going twice, 350,000 going thrice, done. The old man had yet to finish talking. A faint voice sounded out. 400,000, this ye will take it. Chapter 673. Yi Guqin said faintly. His voice was not loud, but it spread throughout the square tower. No one was shocked anymore. Because they were already numb. In their eyes, the geniuses of low-level dynasties were synonymous with poverty. However, Yi Guqin seemed to want to break this perception. His bid was even more generous than those people from the top dynasties, and there was not the slightest hesitation. Heh! Yi Guqin, your things will be mine sooner or later anyway. In the private room, Prince Xingli shook his head and smiled faintly. He was not angry as he muttered to himself. Prince Xingli did not speak again. In the end, the 5 Emperors Universe Sword formation was also bought by Yi Guqin at the price of 400,000 sky crystals. However, no one revealed an envious look. Because in their eyes, there was only doubt. Subsequently, the dynasty auction also came to an end. All kinds of rare minerals, Emperor-level sword techniques, and Earth-level formations appeared. Obviously, the specifications were already quite good. But to everyone's surprise, in this auction, the one who stood out the most was not the geniuses of the top dynasties. It was the native genius of the Saint Origin dynasty, Yi Guqin. He bought a total of 3 treasures, the splendid Heavenly Countenance Pill, the Divine Emperor Sword Technique, and the 5 Emperors Universe Sword Formation. Some people even deliberately calculated. These treasures were worth a total of 1,140,000 sky crystals. That was more than 100 million crystal jades. Everyone was a little stunned. Even if it was a genius from a top dynasty, it was almost impossible to take out 1 million sky crystals casually. Unless it was those overlord-level forces. But Yi Guqin was just a little genius from a low-level dynasty. The difference between the 2 overlord-level forces geniuses was like heaven and earth. Could he take out so many sky crystals? This was the doubt in everyone's heart. It was also because of this that after the auction, surprisingly, no one left directly. Instead, they continued to stay in the square tower as if they wanted to witness something. Because after the auction, it was time to hand over the money and the goods. No one could fool them. And if they could not take out the money, the consequences would be extremely miserable. Losing face was secondary, the price they had to pay would not be small. At this moment, the people from the private rooms on the 2nd floor started to appear one after another. Chu Huang was dressed in a golden dress. Her figure was extremely graceful and her face was beautiful. However, there was a trace of arrogance at the corner of her mouth. If she hadn't said anything, no one would have thought that the woman before them was just a maid. She glanced coldly at Yi Guqin. Clearly, she was still annoyed by Yi Guqin's unreasonable act of bidding against her. As for the legendary Princess Feng Shi, she was not in the private room. Clearly, she did not come. On the other side, Duan Muyu and the others also appeared. Facing Duan Muyu's cold gaze, Yiguchen turned a blind eye. What caught his attention was the two people standing behind Duanmuyu. It was a young man in a starry robe. He had a luxurious aura about him. With one look, one could tell that he was a member of the royal family. Is this person Prince Xingli of the Celestial Star Dynasty? Yiguchen's gaze was deep. This Prince Xingli's aura was vigorous. He had also reached the great hidden martial realm and was not too far away from the heaven and earth spirit bridge. Prince Xingli cast his gaze over and smiled faintly at Yiguchen. Yiguchen saw a tinge of aggression in his eyes, even though he looked warm and friendly. It was a gaze like a hunter who had seen his prey. Yiguchen secretly frowned. Other than fighting for the Five Emperors' Cosmos Sword formation, he and Prince Xingli did not seem to have any interactions. At this moment, Yiguchen caught a glimpse of a person beside Prince Xingli. It was Prince Yuani. It's actually him. Yiguchen was slightly surprised. In the Void Sword realm, Prince Yuani was almost killed by Yiguchen's thunder tide of destruction. In the end, he was barely rescued by Fang Chen. However, it was obvious that Prince Yuani and Yiguchen had already formed a life and death feud. He then saw Prince Yuani following beside Prince Xingli like a slave. The result was self-evident. Could it be that Prince Yuani instigated Prince Xingli to target me? However, Prince Xingli is probably not such a stupid person. Prince Yuani must have used some means to incite him. In Yiguchen's mind, many thoughts arose in an instant. Wealth, power, none of these are possible. The Saint Origin dynasty is too inferior to the Star dynasty. And the only thing that Prince Yuani can do to move Prince Xingli, could it be? A thought suddenly flashed in Yiguchen's mind. Back then, when he had obtained the first immemorial sword token, Prince Yuani had also obtained an immemorial sword token. It's the immemorial sword token. Yiguchen's heart sank slightly. Perhaps this would explain why Prince Xingli would see him as prey. Prince Yuani had used the secret of the immemorial sword token as the price to let Prince Xingli deal with him. At the same time, Prince Yuani looked at Yiguchen with a vengeful look in his eyes. Humph, the Saint Origin dynasty can't keep the immemorial sword token at all. It's better to give it away. Not only can it gain the favor of the Star dynasty, but it can also eliminate all the enemies. Yiguchen, even if you have the identity of the barbarian tribe's young king, you're just a dog in front of the Star dynasty. Prince Yuani's lips curled into a cold smile. In his eyes, Yiguchen would not live for long. Yiguchen, I'd like to see if you can take out more than 1,000,000 sky crystals. If you can't, humph, you won't be able to walk out of the Four-Direction Tower even without the Phoenix Nye dynasty's teaching. Chu Huang said coldly. You don't have to worry about it, Yiguchen said casually. You. Chu Huang was speechless. He was also extremely impatient with Yiguchen. At this moment, another figure walked out from the private room on the second floor. Brother Yi, I've said that we'll meet again. The figure was wearing a mask and had a lazy temperament. He walked slowly towards Yiguchen. It was the masked young man from the Battle Sword Hall. Oh, thank you. Yiguchen smiled faintly and cupped his hands together. He was naturally thanking the masked young man for not competing with him for the Divine Emperor Sword Principle. It's just an incomplete Divine Emperor Sword Principle. It's nothing. The masked young man waved his hand casually. Oh. Yiguchen's eyes were deep. The masked young man was indeed from a powerful background to be able to say such words. Chu Huang, on the other hand, frowned. She wanted to criticize Yiguchen, but the masked young man ignored her and even chatted with Yiguchen. Who are you? Are you related to Yiguchen? Chu Huang shouted coldly. What does it have to do with you? Mind your own business. The masked young man shook his head and seemed to be quite disdainful. Seeing that the masked young man dared to talk back to Chu Huang, the surrounding people were a little surprised. Birds of a feather flock together. This person is the same as Yiguchen. The ignorant are fearless. Yan Xiaotang curled his lips. Obviously, he also thought that the masked young man was an ignorant fellow. Hearing the discussion around her, Chu Huang's face turned ugly. She was the supreme talent of the Fengni dynasty and the maid of Princess Fengxi. How could she be provoked by a few insignificant people? Even if the masked young man was in a private room on the second floor, she did not think that he had a powerful background. It seems that you and Yi Guqin are jackals of the same tribe. Chu Huang vaguely emitted the oppressive aura of the grand obscure gate. Sigh, brother Yi, to be provoked by such a shrew, I pity you. The masked young man shook his head and clicked his tongue. What did you say? You're courting death. Chu Huang immediately glared at him. Her eyes were spewing flames. How dare he call her a shrew? Boom. Although fighting was not allowed in the square tower, Chu Huang did not care about the rules. She directly attacked and wanted to take down the masked young man. The masked young man's eyebrows furrowed slightly. He stomped on the ground with one foot and a terrifying wave of true energy rushed toward Chu Huang. How dare you? Let your master do it. Pfft. Chu Huang was directly sent flying back and a trace of blood flowed from the corner of her mouth. Her face was filled with shock as she cried out involuntarily. Spiritual bridge of heaven and earth. Chapter 674. Chu Huang's face was filled with unconcealable astonishment. The masked youth was actually a heaven's pride at the spiritual bridge of heaven and earth. He was already equivalent to a heaven's pride of a top dynasty. For example, Crown Prince Xinghong of the Skystar dynasty and Princess Fengxi of the Fengni dynasty were all at this level. Looking at Chu Huang, who was pushed back by a single move, the surrounding spectators were secretly shocked. Their eyes were filled with astonishment as they looked at the masked youth. This person was definitely not a nameless person. Yan Xiaotong's body shrunk back as cold sweat appeared on his forehead and he shut his mouth. He was just muttering that the masked youth was as ignorant as Yi Guqin, but now it seemed that he was the ignorant one. Chu Huang secretly gritted his teeth as he coldly spat out, "Who are you?" "I'm Kenpo of the Sword Dynasty." The masked youth called Kenpo flicked his sleeves as he spoke in an indifferent tone. "What? The Sword Dynasty?" The moment Kenpo's words came out, everyone's face suddenly changed. Even the old man in charge of the auction was stunned. What kind of existence was the Sword Dynasty? It was known as the Sword Cultivator Kingdom, a pilgrimage place for sword cultivators. It was a top dynasty among the top dynasties with powerful strength and a deep foundation. There were more than 20 experts at the False Saint realm and many venerables. They formed the Sword Tao Alliance to lead the Sword Dynasty. Among the 100 great dynasties of the South Horizon region, existences like the Fengni dynasty could only be ranked in the top 10. However, the Sword Empire was the undisputed leader of the 100 great empires, the number one existence. If a true Heaven's Tribulation saint appeared in the Sword Alliance, then the Sword Dynasty could truly become an overlord force. The Sword Dynasty. Chu Huang's beautiful eyes widened as she sucked in a breath of cold air. Her delicate body slightly trembled. Facing a heaven's pride of the Sword Dynasty, not to mention her, even Princess Fengxi would have to treat him with respect. Beside her, Prince Xing Li's eyes also revealed a grave expression. Although his Star Dynasty wasn't weak, compared to the Sword Dynasty, it was still lacking. The geniuses of the Sword Dynasty don't even need to go through the preliminaries. They can directly participate in the battle of the geniuses. Why are you here? Chu Huang's tone was somewhat hoarse. He didn't dare to be as unyielding as before. Kenpo shook his head slightly. I just wanted to see how many of the younger generation were worthy of my attention. However, from the looks of it, other than Brother Yi, the rest of the geniuses, TSK, seeing Saber Nine's attitude, all the other prodigies were seething with rage. In Kenpo's eyes, they were not even comparable to a prodigy from a low-level dynasty. However, no one dared to refute Kenpo. Because they all knew. In the Sword Dynasty, there was no such thing as a prince or a crown prince. There was no such thing as a royal family. The Sword Dynasty was ruled by the Sword Alliance. The Sword Dao Alliance would recruit some outstanding Sword Dao geniuses from all over the world and select the so-called Sword Son. The Sword Son of the Sword Dynasty was equivalent to the princes of other dynasties. When a prodigy became a Sword Son, he would hide his identity, wear a mask, and have the same surname. From the beginning to the end, there were only 13 Sword Sons in the Sword Dynasty. They were from Jian Yi to Jian Shisan. The masked young man in front of them was called Kenpo, which meant that he was ranked 9th among the 13 Sword Sons. Such a status was already extremely honorable. It was not something that ordinary people could provoke. Even those from other top-tier dynasties had to treat Kenpo with respect. Sword Dynasty. Yi Guqin was slightly surprised. He had heard of the Sword Dynasty before, but he didn't expect the masked young man to be from the Sword Dynasty. He now understood why Kenpo didn't care about the incomplete Divine Emperor sword technique. Presumably, a dynasty like the Sword Dynasty didn't lack Divine Emperor sword techniques. After Kenpo revealed his identity, no one dared to say anything. Even people like Chu Huang, Yu Wenji, Duan Muyu, and the others who had conflicts with Yi Guqin didn't dare to say anything. Anyone with a discerning eye could see that Kenpo valued Yi Guqin very much. They didn't understand how a mere 9th transformation prodigy could be appreciated by the Sword Dynasty's Sword Son. Kenpo looked around and shook his head. These people were the real frogs at the bottom of a well. In the sword battle dojo, the sword skills that Yi Guqin displayed had amazed Kenpo. Even the venerable one of the Sword Dynasty couldn't perform such perfect sword skills. In terms of understanding of sword skills, Yi Guqin is definitely a grandmaster, not to mention that he has the brilliant sword heart. Kenpo secretly praised. A prodigy like Yi Guqin was one of a kind in the entire Sword Dynasty. It was ridiculous that the prodigies of the surrounding dynasties had repeatedly mocked and looked down on Yi Guqin. As for the low cultivation level, it was related to one's background. Yi Guqin was born in the Sword Dynasty, so his cultivation level was definitely higher than the 9th transformation Divine Soul. Yi Guqin's amazing talent in sword principle was worthy of Kenpo's friendship. After this brief interlude, it was time for the exchange of money and goods. Humph, so what if you have the Sword Prince of the Sword Dynasty protecting you? Do you think he will help you pay the 1 million heavenly crystals? Chu Huang's complexion alternated between green and white. She snorted coldly and unwillingly. With Kenpo around, she couldn't do anything to Yi Guqin. Duan Muyu and the others didn't look too good, but they were all waiting for Yi Guqin to make a fool of himself. On the other side, Yan Wushuang, Su Jianshi, and the others were extremely worried. Yan Xiaotang, on the other hand, acted as if it had nothing to do with him. Who asked you to be so stubborn? You'll show your true colors later. Yan Xiaotang gloated inwardly. He had been slapped in the face by Yi Guqin in terms of martial arts and forging. The only advantage he had was his wealth. Yan Xiaotang didn't believe that Yi Guqin could take out 1 million heaven crystals. Do you need help? Kenpo secretly asked. Yi Guqin was slightly surprised. He didn't expect Kenpo to ask. He and Kenpo had only sparred a little in the sword battle hall. Thank you. I can deal with it myself, Yi Guqin replied via voice transmission. Alright. Kenpo nodded slightly. He was also a little surprised. To be honest, he didn't believe that Yi Guqin could take out 1 million heaven crystals. Even if Kenpo could take it out, it would cost him a lot. Moreover, it was under the premise that he had to give up some of his treasures. However, no one knew that Yi Guqin had plundered a venerable one's cave abode. The wealth of a venerable one wasn't something that young sky prides like them could compare to. After that, some sky prides who had bid for treasures paid the heaven crystals to exchange for their treasures. Finally, it was Yi Guqin's turn. Sir, it's your turn, the auctioneer said. Everyone's eyes turned to Yi Guqin without hesitation. Youthful heavenly beauty pill, Divine Emperor sword technique, 5 Emperor's Cosmos sword formation. A total of 14 million heaven crystals. After the old man finished speaking, he looked straight at Yi Guqin. Chu Huang crossed her arms in front of her chest and looked coldly at Yiguchen. Yu Wenji, Duanmuyu, and the others had extremely playful smiles on their faces. Although Yan Xiaotang didn't show it too obviously, he also looked like he was watching a good show. Yiguchen looked indifferent and casually threw out a origin ring. Ha, pretending, the sky prides around all shook their heads. This sky pride from a low-level dynasty was quite good at pretending. The old man was also slightly stunned. He picked up the origin ring and checked it. His eyes immediately widened. He took a deep breath, and his expression was extremely solemn. He said in a deep voice, "Give the treasure to this young master." After he said that, the whole place fell silent. Chapter 675. The entire square tower was extremely quiet at this moment. It was so quiet that even the sound of people inhaling could be heard. What did they just hear? The old man actually said that he was going to give the treasure to Yiguchen. There could only be one conclusion. Yiguchen had indeed taken out more than 1 million heaven crystals. I don't believe it. Chu Huang was the first to change her expression. She raised her eyebrows and couldn't help but shout out loud. Even if her master, Princess Fengxi, wanted to take out more than 1 million heaven crystals, it would be difficult for her to do so. How could a genius from a low-level empire take out so much money? The auctioneer glanced at Chu Huang indifferently and handed over his origin ring. Chu Huang snatched it and used her divine sense to check it. Her doubtful expression instantly froze. Then, her face turned ashen as she gritted her teeth. The entire origin ring was filled with shining white heaven crystals, as well as some discounted treasures, elixirs, and so on. There were countless of them. This scene was like a slap to Chu Huang's face. When Duanmuyu saw that Chu Huang was not moving, he smiled faintly and said, "Miss Chu, there's no need to hide anything. Just tell us the result. Let everyone see if Yiguchen is puffing himself up at his own cost." However, when Chu Huang heard this, her face darkened even more. She felt extremely uncomfortable. Her face turned purple as she threw the origin ring to Duanmuyu. Duanmuyu was slightly stunned and then checked it. The smile at the corner of his mouth froze immediately. It looked rather interesting and comical. At this moment, everyone in the four-square tower sensed that something was wrong. That Yiguchen couldn't have really taken out more than 1 million heaven crystals, right? Some of the geniuses swallowed their saliva and said in a dry voice, "Brother Duanmu, let me see." Yu Wenji frowned tightly as he also felt that something was wrong. He took the origin ring and looked at it. The expression on his face also became interesting. Seeing the expressions of the three people, everyone knew that Yiguchen had really taken out more than 1 million heaven crystals. An earth-shaking uproar spread out like a tide. Yan Wushuang and the others were also dumbfounded and couldn't recover for a while. That was more than 1 million heaven crystals. It was a huge sum of money that they had never seen before. When did Yiguchen get it? How is that possible? Give me the origin ring. Yan Xiaotang was so anxious that he stomped his feet. He directly snatched the origin ring and checked it with his divine sense. He took a deep breath and his mind went blank. He felt as if the world was spinning and he almost lost his balance. The space in the origin ring was filled with heaven crystals. Like lightning, they blasted into his mind. Even if he plundered Yan Xiaotang clean from head to toe, he would not be able to take out so many heaven crystals. He then recalled his disdainful words and attitude from before. He was just like a clown. Yan Xiaotang almost spat out 3 liters of blood. His face was so ugly that it turned into the color of pig liver. At the side, Yan Feiling also stuck her head out to take a look. After checking, her little face was also dumbstruck like a wooden chicken, and she fell into a petrified state. This time, no one doubted whether Yiguchen could produce 1 million heaven crystals or not. Yiguchen, you really are. Yan Wushuang laughed bitterly. She didn't know what to say. She recalled that she had wanted to ask Yan Xiaotang to help Yiguchen bid for the treasure. Now, She realized how laughable that thought was. Yan Xiaotang only had a little bit of wealth, but he was already so arrogant. On the other hand, Yi Guqin had 1,000,000 heaven crystals, but he didn't show off at all. He didn't care about such wealth at all. The difference between people was really big. But it was also because of this that Yi Guqin was so outstanding in Yan Wushuang's heart. As the result was confirmed, numerous surprised and bewildered gazes were thrown onto Yi Guqin in unison. This was really beyond their expectations. However, Yi Guqin was very indifferent. He put away the treasures that he had won. Looking at the 3 treasures, the surrounding people's eyes were faintly red. But they didn't lose their minds. At least in the imperial capital, no one dared to snatch these treasures. Moreover, there was still the Sword Dynasty's Kenpo beside Yi Guqin. They seemed to have a good relationship. This youthful heavenly beauty pill, you can directly consume it. Yi Guqin hesitated for a moment before handing the youthful heaven pill to Su Jianshi. This is for me. Su Jianshi's delicate oval face was still in a daze. She looked surprisingly cute. The youthful heaven pill might not be attractive to male cultivators. But to girls, it was infinitely attractive. Damn it! Chu Huang stomped her feet in anger. She was still thinking of a way to snatch the youthful heaven pill from Yi Guqin and give it to Princess Fengxi. But now, Yi Guqin was giving it to Su Jianshi. Some of the female geniuses present looked at Su Jianshi with envy. Yan Xiaotang's face stiffened. He was going to bid for it to curry favor with Yan Wushuang, but now it was given to Su Jianshi by Yi Guqin. Brother Yi, you really dote on sister Su Jianshi. You even gave the sword you forged to sister Su. Shui is jealous. Shui puffed up her cheeks and blinked her big eyes. Of course, this was just a joke. You're so mischievous. Su Jianshi blushed and rubbed Shui's silver hair. But after thinking about it, she still accepted it. A sweet and shy smile appeared on her face as she said, "Thanks, silly boy." Then, she swallowed it. In an instant, Su Jianshi's jade-like skin glowed like water. She was originally as pure and beautiful as a lotus flower, but now, she looked even more pure. Her skin was as white as snow, and her eyes were sparkling. She was elegant and charming. After taking the youthful heaven pill, not only did Su Jianshi become more beautiful, but she also retained her youth. Ha, it's just a small matter. Yi Guqin smiled faintly. Compared to Su Jianshi's sacrifice, his was just a small matter. The nearby Yan Wushuang clenched her fists tightly while a wisp of an extremely bitter smile appeared on the corners of her mouth. As expected, Shuang, was never in your eyes. Yan Wushuang lowered her head and felt a little upset. Yi Guqin didn't notice Yan Wushuang's disappointment. As for the Divine Emperor sword art, Yi Guqin decided to give it to Su Jianshi in private. After all, this sword art would attract some people's attention. The dust of the auction had completely settled. Those prodigies who wanted to stay and watch Yi Guqin make a fool of himself were embarrassed. Instead, they were shocked by Yi Guqin's generosity. As for Chu Huang, Yu Wenji, Duan Muyu, and the others, although they wanted to cause trouble for Yi Guqin. But with Kenpo around, they couldn't do anything. Yi Guqin, I'll make you happy now. See you in the Prodigy Battlefield qualifiers. Yu Wenji flung his sleeves, not wanting to stay any longer. Yi Guqin, just you wait. Duan Muyu also snorted and left. As for Prince Xingli, he took a deep look at Yi Guqin and left without saying a word. Prince Yuani's eyes were filled with hatred, but he didn't say anything. Yi Guqin, don't think that you can do whatever you want just because you have the protection of the Sword Dynasty's Sword Son. I can teach you a lesson in the Prodigy Battlefield qualifiers, let alone the princess. Chu Huang said with a cold face and left. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.